Order. Welcome to today's session of the Business and Trade Select Committee as we commence our inquiry into the Employment Rights Bill and the state of industrial relations in the UK. Antonia Bance needs to declare some interest.
Thank you very much, Chair. I need to declare my interests as set out in the Register of Members' Interests. I was employed by the Trades Union Congress for 9 years until July 2024, and I'm a member of the Trade Union Unite.
Perfect, thank you. That's on the record. Nicola, maybe I could start with you. Thanks so much to you both for coming in. We're really grateful for your evidence. But Nicola, once the Employment Rights Bill becomes legislation, how will the role of trade unions change in Britain, do you think?
Well, I think it's important to start by setting out the really significant opportunities this legislation brings for people at work across the country. And this committee will know, and people at work know, that action is very badly needed to tackle the endemic injustice and inequality that characterises part of our jobs market, with too many workers not knowing from week to week how much they're going to be paid, what hours they're going to be working, whether they're going to be paid if they are sick, whether they're going to be dismissed for no reason. Wages have flatlined in parts of the country and are still below the level they were in the 2008 financial crisis. And income inequality is larger than in any other European country. And our labour market protections fall very far behind very many of our competitors across the OECD. So the big picture context is that this is bad for people at work, and it's also bad for our wider economic health. And this outdated idea that we've got simple trade-offs between rights at work and economic protection is simply disproven by the international economic evidence, which shows very strongly that high employment, decent treatment at work and strong growth go hand in hand. So the first thing I want to say in response to that is that when the bill comes into force, working people and businesses across the country are going to find themselves in a much stronger position. As you referenced...
But do you think that the government has a reasonably clear vision of the future of industrial relations? Is it the same as your vision? And to what extent does this bill fill in and deliver your vision at the TUC for what industrial relations should look like?
I think there's some vital new collective rights that this bill brings forward that will enable working people to benefit more from trade union representation. Trade unions will be better able to represent people at work, and in turn the economy will be better able to benefit from the gains that we know collective bargaining brings. So new rights of access, improved routes to securing statutory recognition for the purposes of collective bargaining, improved opportunities to represent people at work, to address challenges at work before they become insurmountable problems for businesses, reduce risk of unfair employment practices, new opportunities for unions to organise, to represent, to collectively bargain on behalf of workers, including across emerging sectors of the economy where there is not a tradition of trade union membership. This is a really urgently needed opportunity for trade unions. It should enable them to continue to grow, to play their part in rebuilding the economy after 14 years of abject failure. So the answer, I suppose, is yes, this is an important opportunity for the trade union movement, but more importantly for people at work that they represent and for our economy to move towards a higher road of economic performance where better terms and conditions at work are going hand in hand with the sort of growth that we need.
Thank you, but it's not everything you're seeking. So I suppose if the bill goes through, what sort of fraction of the TUC's agenda do you think is then fulfilled? Well, when it comes to industrial relations specifically?
On industrial relations, it's been really positive to hear the government recognise how central the trade union movement is to delivering improvement at work. And government's engagement with trade unions has been positive and welcome, including across broader areas of economic policy, such as the industrial policy. In government's recent consultation on what a modern framework of industrial relations might look like, they do recognise the important role of trade unions in delivering a meaningful voice for people at work. And there are important principles that are set out in that document, which we agree with, of collaboration, proportionality, accountability, and the importance of a modern industrial relations framework balancing the interests of worker, businesses and the wider public. We do think that those ambitions are only achievable via collective bargaining, and we would welcome explicit government recognition of the centrality of collective bargaining to delivering that framework successfully. So I think that's one area where you could say we would like to see a more explicit reference to what the role that collective bargaining needs to play in a successful industrial relations framework.
Okay, thank you. Antonia Bent.
Thank you very much, Chair. And we know that collective bargaining raises wages and cuts inequality. What barriers to the trade union movement growing do you think this bill will help bring down?
Well, I think there are so many important new provisions that the bill provides in terms of opportunities for trade unions to access workplaces, to make the case to people at work of the benefits that trade union membership will bring, improved opportunities to gain recognition where there is employer action to prevent it, and when they have gained recognition, improved opportunities to work through their negotiated agreements to achieve improved pay terms and wider conditions for the workforce. So we think it is both through the government's explicit recognition of the important role that trade unions play in our economy, of the framework that will be introduced that strengthens both individual protections and collective protections, and through the opportunities that gives trade unions to organise and to enable more workers to take the opportunity of joining a union to benefit from collective bargaining, that we think there will be positive growth in trade union membership and more opportunities for workers, for businesses and for employers to reap the benefits of that.
Thank you. And stay with me. I'm turning to Amanda now. Welcome, Amanda, and thank you for being here to represent the workers that you organise. It's appreciated.
Thank you.
So the GMB, turning specifically to Amazon now, the GMB described how Amazon exerted control over information and swamped its workers with anti-union material during the GMB union's recognition bid in the Coventry warehouse. What effect did this have on your ability to organise those workers?
It had a massive effect on the ability to organise those workers and gain that recognition. In fact, we lost a recognition ballot by 28 votes. And if you don't mind me referring to my notes, because I've put some specific stuff in. So the warehouse itself was swamped with anti-union messaging as soon as the application went in. So just to give that some context, we put the application in on the 4th of March and we gained access at the middle of June. So there was quite a long period of time where Amazon managers were aware that we were going for recognition and were able to start to put a narrative inside that fulfilment centre against the trade union. And some of the things they did was they had screens all inside the warehouse, and on every screen, so if you're going in through the bridge, the screen's there. If you're going through reception, the screen's there. If you're eating your lunch, the screen's there. Also, if you're working, you can also see these screens. And on these screens, they had messaging such as, why pay for something you already have? Union recognition may not be right for you if you want to keep putting your priorities first. You decide what's best for you. Union recognition might not be right for you if you want to continue speaking for yourself. Avoid unnecessary unknowns and uncertainty. Have improvements that benefit everyone implemented quickly. With all that you have with Amazon, union recognition may not be the best choice. Why pay for something you have right now? At Amazon, we want to speak with you. A union wants to speak for you. Before you vote for a union, we encourage you to seek out the facts. The best relationships are the direct ones, which obviously wasn't the best relationship for those workers at the time because they'd taken 37 days of strike action around pay and conditions within Amazon. The company also used a virtual notice board. So just to explain, every worker has an app on their phone which is called the A to Z, and it's got everything on there. And also it's got this notice board, which means that people can put questions on there and managers can ask questions. And obviously within the Coventry Fulfilment Centre, you've got people that are of trust there. So you've got the general manager, the ops manager, the HR manager. These are all people that are supposed to be there to support workers during their journey. And some of the things they were putting on this board were, this is the general manager, Gareth Davis. GMB is a union who wants to hear their members' views, but only if you pay. You say GMB have never promised £15 per hour. That is a change from what they told employees. We've never said we guarantee. The actual slogan is fight for 15. Everyone should wonder actually what the union is promising. Recognition gives the right to ask for a pay increase. It does not give the right to force one. GMB is a business, which is not accurate. When he was asked a yes or no question on whether the site would close if we gained recognition, this was his answer. He said, this is not a question that attracts a simple yes or no. I think it is a question that attracts a simple yes or no. But he said, Amazon constantly reviews its network of sites around the UK, then goes on to mention sites that they closed recently. So in other words, that didn't really clear up that rumour that had been started. If GMB are recognised, we cannot guarantee BHX4 associates that they will receive any pay increase award in October. Other colleagues in FCs will. This is because Amazon will require to ask GMB to agree to the pay increase. Amazon wants to give you. If GMB says no, we can't give you that pay rise. Therefore, the key thing that would change for you with recognition that relates to pay is the ability for GMB to block a pay rise whilst they ask for more, which may never come. Our view is that you have more to lose than to gain with recognition. This is the general manager who should be, giving real, honest facts to workers so that they can make an informed choice. Then there was Vinny Gini, the senior HR manager. Nobody is bragging. I'm explaining the reality of what recognition is. I'm sorry if you're not happy with the facts. I've also explained that if recognition happens, there will be no October pay review for BHX4. While other sites are included, the time it would take to form a recognition agreement would likely mean that pay negotiations would start in 2025. And we were actually applying for recognition, and the ballot would have been in July. So we would have been talking to Amazon faster than that.
Okay, thank you for that.
Would you characterise this as an open, a neutral space in which Amazon workers could make their decision as to whether they wish to be represented by their union or not?
Absolutely not. If there was anything that was pro-union that went up on that board, it was taken down really quickly. In fact, we took the time in how long it stayed up. Some of our workers did that. If it was something that was against the union and in favour of voting no to union recognition, then it would stay on the board for weeks. Amazon management had 5 sessions with every worker inside there. So there's 3,000 workers on site, and they had a 1-hour session 5 times with every worker, even before we managed to gain access, and then another further 2 sessions once we'd gained access. We had 1 session with workers.
And is this usual, Amanda? Is this the way companies normally behave when a union says, do you know what, we've got a large mass of workers that would like to be represented by a union, we'd like to open a conversation about recognition with you? Is this normal?
It is normal for other employers to open a conversation with us, and even going through the statutory process, which we had to do to try to force recognition, you would still find that there would be a dialogue with the actual employer. We had to do all of our dialogue through their lawyers, from our lawyers. They would not speak directly to us. Normally we would negotiate an access agreement within a few weeks. We started negotiating ours in May, and we didn't get access until the middle of June. And the access agreement is like nothing you have ever seen. We can provide that if you want to. It even detailed that we couldn't go to the toilet unless we were escorted there and escorted back, and we couldn't leave the room that we were in to do our presentations.
Amanda, can you just characterise Amazon's response against the response of other employers that you've sought recognition agreements with?
Sorry.
How does Amazon compare to other employers that you've sought recognition agreements to?
Completely different.
Completely
like I said,
okay.
Wouldn't speak to us directly, always had to go through lawyers. Every detail was taken off, whether we should be using a projector or a television, how many screens that we were going to be able to use, how we, went to the toilet and come back. None of this usually happens when you're negotiating an access agreement with another employer. You sit down with the employer and you talk about, how that's going to work.
Okay. Nicola, briefly, because I've got lots of
to
colleagues want to come in on this point. Yeah.
Just on this point, to briefly reiterate what Amanda has set out, that the vast majority of collective agreements are reached voluntarily, and I think it's really important for this debate that point is heard and recognised, that most employers want to work with their workforces, they want to make sure that people's voices are heard, and they want to benefit from the gains that come when you can reach a collective agreement that means that it's easier to handle change, it improves your industrial relations, it improves performance, your health and safety, your productivity. So we need to have this debate about the strengthening of the legislation in the context that for most employers, they are happy to work with unions where they want to seek recognition and to benefit from the shared gains that come.
Sure, Reynolds.
Thanks, Chair. Amanda, just to confirm, you said that in Coventry you lost by just 28 votes?
Yes.
So if you lost by just 28 votes, do you really think that Amazon's messaging had that big an impact? If the margins were so fine, did it make that big of an impact, you think?
I absolutely think that it did, yes, because prior to that, we'd taken 37 days of strike action where we'd had thousands of workers that had been on that picket line protesting about their pay and conditions within there. We should have...
Because you said earlier there were 3,000 workers in Coventry.
Yeah.
So how many did you have on the picket line?
So we had 1,400 workers altogether,
so
different shifts, so yeah.
But then surely... if you had half of workers out on the picket line, or just less than half of workers out on the picket line, that surely seems to understand that half of workers on the picket line, about half of workers said they wanted unionisation. So how does that correlate with your idea that Amazon's messaging made that big of an impact when everything you've said seems to correlate about right?
It doesn't work like that. Not everybody will come and stand on that picket line. There's a lot of fear and division inside those fulfilment centres. They're designed in such a way that even the way they employ the staff is from different communities, so people are divided from that point of view. So some people, that were new, like on our first application, there was only 1,400 people working at Amazon, and after we applied and we had about 750 workers, they flooded the fulfilment centre with another 1,400 workers. Those workers are new workers, temporary contracts. A lot of them supported wanting a union on the inside, but wouldn't have stood on that picket line because they didn't want to be visual. But we know from the chats that we've had over WhatsApp, that kind of thing, we've got thousands of workers on our WhatsApp groups, that people wanted this. Initially they wanted this, but the time it took us to get that access into there, they were able to do a job where they said, you can join a union, you can strike, but if you vote for this recognition, it's different, it's bad and you can't get rid of it. It means the union are going to take 2 years to negotiate your pay. The union are going to block flexi time, they're going to block overtime. Everything we do from now on will have to be done by the union, and this site will probably close if we get recognition. So that was the messaging that was able to be put across. So to be honest, you're right, we did do well to only lose by 28 votes. But at the beginning of that process, we should have won by at least another 500 votes.
Alison Griffiths.
I just wanted to go back to a point that Nicola Smith made earlier about the benefits to employers, because I just wanted to flip this round the other way briefly. Yeah, there has to be an incentive for employers. So how would you characterise the benefit to an employer, and Amazon in particular, if you like, of union recognition?
Well, currently the health and safety inside those fulfilment centres is not up to standard in any way. We've got people on the back of wagons that are working alone, that are lifting boxes above their head. We've got people that...
Bring you back to the question though, what is in it for the employer?
Well, I'm going to get to that. I just need to kind of give you a picture. So I'm recently dealing with a guy who's got chemicals in his eyes and he's now got 20% sight. Everybody that works there has some sort of injury because of the nature of the work. So if we were to have recognition and be on the inside, then we would be able to work with our elected reps to improve that health and safety. So that would be a better workplace for people to come to work. And when people come to work and they're not having to suffer injury, then they're able to be more productive. So instead of working people to an extent that breaks their body, we can measure a safe way of working and we can bring that in. That will be beneficial in the long term to any workplace where health and safety is good, people feel satisfied and happy to come to work. Our guys are proud to go and do a good job. They work 10-hour shifts. What they don't want to have to do is to go in and work to an algorithm that doesn't give them a target, so they're working as fast as they can every minute of every day. I was once told that working in Amazon for an hour is like being at the gym for an hour, and they have to keep that pace up for 10 hours. So the benefit to the employer is that we can help. We have that experience. We have professionals that know about health and safety. Our reps will be in plenty across the whole of that fulfilment centre. So it means that if management are missing something that's not safe, our safety reps will be picking that up and making those changes, so it's a better workplace for workers and then hence a better place, a better productive place.
Yeah, thank you. So you mentioned 37 days of strike action. I mean, my interpretation is that people have to be pretty desperate to do that. You just mentioned kind of health and safety. What else are kind of like the key triggers for resulting in that activity?
When we first started the industrial action, our workers were on £10 an hour. They had just worked through a pandemic where Amazon had declared them as essential workers, even though there is some question about that. When other workplaces were slowing down and bringing less people to work, that kind of thing for social distancing, Amazon was packing more people into the fulfilment centres to be able to do all of the orders that were coming in, because they were coming to Amazon because nowhere else was open. So they'd been through all of that. There'd been outbreaks. We'd spent a lot of time with environmental health trying to bring something in to change that, because Amazon wouldn't speak to us directly. And then once they got through that, and Amazon made billions of pounds through that process, the cost of living crisis hit, and the workers then felt that they would be able to rely on their employer to give them at least a couple of pound increase an hour so that they could live, because at the moment they wasn't living. They were, food banks, borrowing money from paycheck to paycheck. So the main reason that they were striking for those 37 days was because of pay initially, but also because they wanted people to know what it was like to work in those fulfilment centres. They wanted their voices to be heard. So it is the conditions on the inside. It is the AI that is used against them. It pitches worker against worker. You never know what your target is. So you could, every day you could be working as hard as you can and never hitting that target. Depends on whether you're working with people that are younger and fitter or whether you're working with somebody that would be at the same pace as you. That's an issue. Health and safety is an issue, and low pay is an issue.
Thanks. Nicola, do you want to come in?
Well, I just think on the general benefits of collective bargaining, there's a really substantial national and international evidence base on the gains that employers and workers take when you have a collective bargaining arrangement in place. That includes more training, better, more family-friendly measures, less long hours, better health and safety, good for the workforce, also good for the employer, but also specifically for the employer, lower turnover, reduced incidence of poor health and safety in the workplace, as I just said, higher productivity, higher innovation, more use of high-performance workplace practices, less staff anxiety around management of change, easier to handle industrial transitions. And I suppose the broader thing is, why would you not want to have a working arrangement in place where you can hear directly from your workforce, the experts in what is happening day to day in your business, in what is going on, and work with them to identify problems early, to address them, and to make sure that you can work together with them to agree a way of working that is going to work for them and is therefore going to work for you. And it's not just us that say that, it's the IMF, it's the OECD. It's very clear that there are businesses around the world who recognise the gains that working in partnership with their workforces and bargaining collectively to make sure that workers' voice is heard in what is inherently an unequal relationship between employees and employers, and that when you do that, you bring gains both for your own business but also for the wider economy.
Thank you. Rosie Writing.
Thank you. So this is a question to both. How significant are the changes to trade union access in levelling the playing field for organising?
I could start on that if that's helpful. I think that one thing that's a really important piece of context to this legislation is that in the past people have often learned about trade unions and the experiences of collective bargaining by just going to work. And clearly across very large parts of the private sector now, that's just not the case. There are lower levels of union membership across the economy in the private sector than there were in the past. And there's been really big changes in terms of the structure of employment in this country that everybody knows about. New forms of working without one centralised point of working, hybrid working, multi-site working. And that means that traditional ways of people finding out about unions and finding out about the opportunity to join do not work in the way that they once did. As Amanda has very clearly set out, I think, in some of what she's talked about with GMB's experience of Amazon, unions at the moment only gain some access rights to workplaces when they have been awarded them in a ballot for recognition. And that means that there can be where employers want to actively prevent union organisation. Lots of employer responses to union attempts to gain recognition which are actively seeking to prevent it. So that can mean ordering the union away, examples of calling the police, intimidating reps with drones, ensuring that workers leave by another door, all sorts of action that can be taken to prevent people from finding out about the benefits that unions will bring and from then deciding whether or not they want to join. And this can make it really very difficult for unions to do the initial recruitment and organising that they need to do to give people a meaningful choice over whether or not they want to join a union and in turn whether or not recognition is right for that workplace. We think that the changes in this area will make it easier for unions to access workplaces, to talk to people about the benefits of membership, and will also reduce opportunities for employers to actively seek to prevent union organisation. And there are rights like this in place across other parts of the world, including in Australia, New Zealand, and across Europe. There are also some areas where, of course, we would like to see the provisions strengthened, and particularly we're aware that at the moment the Employment Rights Bill includes provisions for digital access, for physical access to workplace, but we don't have in there explicit reference to digital access, and we think that that should be explicitly included in the legislation. And it's important that it is for the same purposes as the physical access to meet, represent, to recruit, to organise workers. And that would be entirely consistent with the existing approach that is in place once unions have got access rights and have got over the initial recognition threshold. So that would be one particular change where we think the legislation could be strengthened, but in the round, really important that there are new opportunities here for unions to gain access, to talk to people, because we know there are employers who are actively seeking to prevent that in a moment in a way that is not sensible for individual businesses nor for our economy overall.
Thank you. So just building on that, so are you satisfied that the new right of access afforded to unions are enforceable on employers who may willfully choose to fail to comply with the access orders?
Well, we think that the government is actively consulting at the moment on the enforcement of the access powers that are provided for in the legislation. And there are areas where we will both need to make sure that the system is working in a way that doesn't allow access rights to get bogged down by active employer attempts to prevent their meaningful use. And there's probably some actual operational thought that needs to be given to how that works, not least including resourcing for the CAC, and an expanded role. But we're also clear that the measures that are in the bill will need to be enforced properly, as you imply. And there's a range of measures that we would like to see and that we know are subject to active consultation at the moment, including a proper penalty regime and including, importantly, a CAC or declaration given being relied on, although it was a court order. We don't want to see a regime where employers can simply price in the cost of avoiding these measures, and we need to see sufficient weight given to the enforcement activities and the enforcement sanctions that are in place to make sure that they can't just be avoided.
I think if you want to kind of look at that as well, it might be good to ask Amazon how much money they did spend to prevent us from organising down at Coventry, because Amazon would be the sort of company that would just factor in those fines. I think it would be good to also include something that looks at companies that benefit from the public purse. So Amazon currently benefits from contracts with the government that are, we believe, around £1 billion. And if this is the case, then surely there should be some sanctions on them and the way that they treat workers and allow access to unions.
Amanda, when you look at this bill, do you think this bill would meaningfully change the kind of access that you sought when it came to Amazon?
I believe it goes away to do that, definitely.
The whole way?
It depends on how employers react to that. Yeah. But I think, you know, it's definitely a good step towards it, and we do welcome that. It's just, you know, whether that's enforced in the right way. You know, we've got lots of things like GDPR in place where you get fined if you don't comply with GDPR, but it doesn't always work in the right way that it should. So we want to see, you know, that if employers...
That's a really important point. So we're actually going to have to be able to adjust this legislation as it's implemented if it's to achieve the intention set out by the government, by the sound of it. Okay. Sorry, Nicola, did you want to come back?
Well, just on the penalties point in particular, I mean, to reiterate on that, what we have suggested in response to current government consultation in this area is that the penalty fines will need to reflect both the size and the financial resources of employers. Right. And the GDPR example is a good one because in that case, the Information Commissioner can levy fines, I think, of the higher of 17.5 million or 4% of annual worldwide turnover. So, you know, where you're going to have fines, make them proportionate, and where you are going to have sanctions, make sure that they are have the weight of a court order to ensure that they actually have impact and can't be ignored.
Griffiths.
Why do you think it is, though? I just want you to reflect on this. Why do you think it is that private employers and entrepreneurs who've built up their own businesses would want to have control over access to their businesses? And what are the risks to employees of enforcement of access?
Don't think, I mean, from my perspective, I can't see there are any risks. The opportunity is for a union to make a presentation, to present information to the workforce about why they might want to consider joining a union and to communicate with the workforce.
Sorry, just with respect, I'm actually asking you to consider the view of the employer.
Well, I
so
suppose
put yourself in their shoes.
Well, I work for an employer and, you know, I have responsibility for management of people, and in my position in that role, I can see no reason at all why anyone would have a problem with it. It's an opportunity to present to your workforce in the same way you would want them to benefit from any other opportunity, to take part in union organisation, which will bring benefits for them and benefits for you as an employer. So I can see no reason to prevent access. Individual members of your team and your workforce can decide whether or not they want to join, and if they do join and they want to seek recognition with you, you then have the opportunity to work with them, to hear more from your workforce and to gain from all the benefits that we know collective bargaining will bring for your individual workforce and also for your business performance more widely. So I can see no reason why you would not want to enable that to happen. I can only see positives that would come from the improved engagement and the improved working practices that would follow as a result.
Okay, Antonia, did you want to come back?
Thank you very much, Chair. And I seem to recall, and this is a question on the penalties, and I may have this wrong, Chair, that P&O priced in the cost of losing the employment tribunals in the offers that they made to their workers, therefore making an absolute mockery of UK law. And I think colleagues are seeking to ensure that that sort of thing doesn't happen. I wanted to come back to Amanda on the topic of access. Amanda, would you describe the access that GMB had to those workplaces as a level playing field with the employer? What sort of access did you have? And were there any inducements offered to people to leave the union?
Yeah, the access that we got was just one 45-minute session with each worker. So as I previously said, Amazon had 5 sessions of an hour each with every single person on site. Ours was just one 45-minute meeting. It was voluntary, so it meant that if people didn't know it was happening, they didn't have to attend. If they missed a session that they were appointed to for any reason, like off sick, it was really difficult for them to come. So we don't believe that we had, the same amount of access that the company had. So there was no level playing field. And this was just during the 20 days of the ballot period. So during that 20 days, you would have to have access and then the ballot. So the company had already started from March, if you recall, and we didn't actually get access until June. So up until that point, they'd had, meeting after meeting, full-on access. One of the things that they'd done was they created a QR code, which meant if you scanned it with your phone, it would populate an email into your phone that would then go to Midlands membership and cancel your membership. And not just cancel it, but ask for it to be completely moved from your system. Our lawyers said that this was an inducement, and we're currently challenging that through the legal process. But all of these, practices right up until we got access, and then during access, every time we had a meeting, Amazon said that they would need the same meeting, even though they'd had 5 meetings previously. People would come in and stop our meetings at 45 minutes and send people back to the workplace. At one point they asked me to police people going back to the workplace, which I said no, and they would come in then and send people back. We didn't have access to the projector. I know it seems like a small thing, but when you've got a room full of people and they're telling you can only use a television that's probably this big and people at the back of the room can't see that, everything that they could do to prevent us from having access to that workforce, they did.
Okay. Matt Weston, very briefly.
Ms Smith, I see you're at the TUCN responsible for international trade union or insight into international trade union. Is that right in the description I saw?
Not technically, no, but I'm happy to. I'm happy to answer some questions. I think there's an updated job description that's now in the pack.
Apologies. I guess the simple question though is just how you think the Employment Rights Act, when it comes to access, do you think it's comparable with other countries such as France and Germany? Do you have any view on that?
I think in general, what we know from a piece of work that we commissioned from Professor Simon Deacon at Cambridge University earlier this year is that in general, UK employment law is very far behind very many of our international competitors. So as I already referenced, we know that on access there are arrangements to enable trade union access in place across many other European countries, across any other countries in the OECD. But we also know in general on both collective and individual rights, we are very, very far behind many other countries where they are running their economies successfully with higher levels of employment protection, with better treatment at work, with higher levels of sectoral and collective bargaining. And there's no reason to presume that the UK can't shift towards a similar successful model.
For example, Amazon have sites in other countries. Obviously, it'd be interesting to know how their legislation compares and how they actually insist on that legislation through, say, in France or Germany for Amazon sites. Anyway,
thank you. Sarah Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. It's very nice to see you again, Amanda. We have both spent time outside Amazon. The pathway to get to recognition is a very long one, isn't it? Yeah. It takes years. It takes on average, 2-3 years sometimes. You've been working on it that entire time, and so have your colleagues and the team. So you've built up, obviously, that relationship with your members. So what would it have meant to them to have achieved that recognition? Can you put some colour into that sort of?
Yeah, I'm going to refer to my notes as well on this one because they're here today, so I just don't want to get this wrong, and they helped me to put this together because I asked them this myself, how would it have felt if you
slightly against us, Amanda, sorry.
Had that recognition?
Be concise.
Sorry?
The clock is slightly against us.
Oh, sorry. I can't find it now either as well. So, it really would have meant everything. The workplace is not a good place to work. I've been working with Amazon workers for 13 years, actually, even though we've been in Coventry for the last 2 years. They're suffering injuries day in, day out. There's a disproportionate amount of ambulances that go to site than any other warehouses, which means that, it's not a safe environment that they're working in. I've talked about health and safety. It's not a priority. There's AI that's used against them. It's an algorithm that pitches worker against worker. And it just means that you know, they bring you in, they work you, and if anybody's worked at Amazon for longer than 2 years, they will have some kind of injury. Garfield behind me used to ride a bike to work. He was fairly fit, and now he can barely catch the bus. He has real pain with his knees. Paramarathon's wife has now got a back injury for life. Mohammed Nur, that's with us as well, had a back injury at work and will, you know, find it difficult now to be in work all of the time. I talked about Adnan that had chemicals go into his eyes. These processes continue. Since we lost the recognition, somebody's arm went into a conveyor belt. You know, the change that recognition would have meant that we could have elected reps in there that would have been able to look after this health and safety. They would have been able to, you know, inspect, put things in place, stop unsafe practices. It would have meant that workers would have a seat at the table when it comes to talking about their pay and conditions that affect them. So flexible working for people with children and caring responsibilities. Some of most of the workers down in Coventry pick up 60 hours a week so that they can afford to, you know, put food on the table. It's an 80% migrant workforce, so there's not only the responsibility of living in the UK, but also family that depend on those wages as well. I just want to make sure I've got everything. Oh, Seferina, that's with us, had a heart attack at work. She believes that was brought on by the stress of keeping hold of her job. And since we lost the recognition, they've taken off the reasonable adjustments that she had and put her somewhere that she can no longer talk to workers. So, you know, recognition means such a lot to these guys, but also not having recognition means now that they're targets because they came forward and, you know, spoke on behalf of other workers to enable us to get this recognition. They find themselves using food banks, payday loans, and so therefore, you know, having that seat at the table and being able to push for better paying conditions and making the employer listen to them would have meant everything to them. It would definitely have stamped out bad practices. They, you know, I've talked about how they can elect their own people that would be able to represent them and look after them, the power to stop work if it's unsafe. These workers, they matter to me, and I hope they matter to you, and I genuinely want to know that this bill, that they need to deliver a chance for them to make a change, a small amount of control over their own lives and a chance to be listened to and really heard. Workers shouldn't need to survive when they're working 60 hours a week. They should be thriving, and that's what it would have meant to them, the difference between surviving and, you know, having an injury on a daily basis or actually being able to thrive and perhaps spend a bit more time with their family.
Okay, thank you. Great point.
This one's Nicola Smith, please. You've touched on this in some of your previous answers, but I just think it's important to tease out a little further. The bill proposes several changes to the requirements for union recognition, looking to lower and streamline requirements, essentially making it easier to recognise. What do you think of those changes, and do you think they go far enough?
Well, we think that they're important changes, both to the trigger that would enable the statutory recognition process to start and to the ballot process to enable recognition to be achieved. A few things I want to say about recognition just in general is that, one, at the moment, as the bill recognises, the system we think is stacked too far against the employee. As I've referenced already, you know, the working relationship is inherently one where there is inequalities in power, and at the moment it's too hard for workers to get the right to achieve union recognition in their workplaces. But I think it's also really important to reiterate that where you achieve recognition, that does not in and of itself achieve any change for people at work. Unions can't just act unilaterally with a recognition agreement to make changes. That comes through collective action, that comes through growing workplace membership, that comes through negotiating change with employers. So the opportunity to be recognised is the start of the process of working constructively and well with an employer to improve working conditions and to ensure that there is, you know, a fairer balance of power and of the gains of people's labour being shared with them. But it is the start of a process, and it rises or falls on the support of the union members in that individual business. However, as you say, there are too many barriers at the moment to achieving recognition, and we think that the changes both to scrap the 10% membership requirement in a workplace before unions are able to even start the process, to replace that with a 2 to 10% requirement is a welcome one. We would welcome a 2% trigger. We think that's consistent with the information and consultation legislation, which is already in place and makes sense. We think it's important unions will no longer have to show that there's a majority of workers likely to support the process before it even starts. And we think it's important that the ballot will need to be a simple majority and that there will be a removal of the requirement for 40% of those eligible to vote in favour. There are still some wider barriers in place, and we would welcome some further changes that we think will help prevent the minority of hostile employers from using weaknesses in the existing processes to prevent collective bargaining. For example, the 3-year wait before a union can make a new application for recognition following a failed attempt. Also, we think that the scope statutory recognition gives to bargain collectively over pay, hours and holidays is very narrow, and we think that legislation could be broadened in scope to include a range of other areas that could be subject to collective bargaining, including pensions.
Thanks, Sarah. Do you mind if I just move on to Sarah, and then I'm going to come back to you? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Nicola, there's sort of a wider conversation here to be had about the level of unionisation across the workforce. So in 1995, it was about 32%, and that dropped down to 32%, and it dropped to 22% in 2022. So should the reforms just be focusing on the access, bargaining position or awareness of workers, or do we need a bigger conversation about the future of the UK's industrial relations?
I think we're starting to have that conversation. That the government has set out in its principles of what constructive industrial and what modern industrial relations would look like. Its ambition that more workplaces should work in a collaborative way, should recognise the importance of worker voice. And I think that while union membership in the private sector has fallen in recent years, we have seen a small increase. We've seen an increase in recent years in the number of collective agreements across the economy, and we have a real opportunity now with this legislation to start to provide unions with easier access to workplaces, to make the case to people at work for the benefits that union membership and recognition will bring. So I think that the bill provides a really important framework. There are areas where we would like to see it slightly strengthened, yes, but it's an important framework for enabling more people to benefit from the gains of union membership and to start to turn around some of those trends. And it's also an important opportunity to recognise, the large number of workplaces where I think it's something like 30% across the economy of people at work are already covered by a collective agreement, of all the benefits that constructive working between unions and employers can bring, and that, even through small measures like including a written statement of your right to join a union in your terms and conditions when you join a workplace, that actually unions are a part of the fabric of employment in the UK, just like any other part of your terms and conditions and ways of working, and that joining a union is as much of a right of work as you have a right to a paid holiday or you have a right to time off when you're sick. And so I think moving towards a national conversation where, like many other countries, we recognise that trade unions play an important role in balancing inequalities in power at work, in improving the opportunities for workers to have their voice heard, and in helping address the inevitable challenges of treatment at work and of pay at work, and of securing, a decent share of the rewards of their labour for the people who are working hard every day to help bring those gains. We're moving in the right direction, and that's the direction that this legislation will move us in. And in the years ahead, as it becomes embedded, as unions are able to take the opportunity of the new provisions it provides, I hope we will see that conversation continue, and we will move back to a position where unions are recognised as, the important active players in the jobs market that they should be and are across many other developed countries.
Finally, Antonia Bansman.
Thank you very much. And just to reflect on the conversation we've had, and thinking this inquiry is about the employment bill and what the employment bill will cover and won't cover. And I'd appreciate your closing thoughts on that. But for me, the protection against intimidation it feels like we might need some sort of strengthened role for the CAC to ensure that there are better protections against intimidation. And is that in the bill? I hadn't realised and was appalled to find out the morning after the ballot, coming so very close, that we were now facing, that the union members are now facing a 3-year lockout. And will the bill get rid of that? And if not, does it need to change to get rid of that? And I guess that those were the things that really came through that we need to try to make sure that we fix in this employment bill. Do we think those points are covered, or does more work need to happen on them?
I think more work needs to happen to protect reps during that process, because at that point they're not, because we're not recognised, they're not recognised by the company, they're not covered off with the same protection. We would like to see that. So if reps are involved in a campaign for recognition, then they should be protected through that process and then after that process as well. You're right, the 3-year stop out is ridiculous and actually leaves our members now vulnerable for the next 3 years. And we can share this with you as well, because I know you're gathering evidence, but we did a paper. We didn't want it to be for nothing, the campaign, because we came so close and had to endure such a lot of the anti-trade union rhetoric that we thought we'd put that in a paper that gave 10 recommendations, and I'm pleased to say 7 of those are currently in the bill. But the one of those that didn't make it in is the 3-year reducing. We've asked for, say, like a 6-month stop out or something like that. And also reducing the process of the CAC into, days for a membership check rather than months, that kind of thing. So they can't flood a bargaining unit in the same way that they did for us. They brought in 1,400 workers within the period of time that it took, the CAC to do that membership check.
Talking to union members following the ballot, when it became clear quite how close GMB had come, my understanding is that the window for challenging the ballot result was basically closed to GMB because the law said it had to go in within 24 hours of the ballot closing. But I think in one of the background papers I read, the ballot result wasn't made available to GMB until 48 hours after, so there was no opportunity to challenge any aspect of the ballot. Is that correct, Amanda?
That's absolutely true. You have to put in your appeal within 24 hours, and you don't get the results for 48 hours. And if you do appeal on the off chance you might lose, then you could have to rerun that process again. So if you've won and you have to go through all of that again with the same anti-trade union stuff that we had to endure the first time, we probably wouldn't have made it over. We probably would have had a worse defeat the second time as well. So it doesn't make any sense.
Thank you so much. The clock is against us and we've got a lot of questions to get through, a lot of witnesses this afternoon. But Amanda, Nicola, thank you so much for kicking off our inquiry today. That concludes this panel. Order, order.
For having us.
Order. Welcome to the second panel of our first session of inquiry into the Employment Rights Bill and Industrial Relations. Very grateful to Matthew Percival and Ben Willmott for joining us today. And today, for this panel, Alison Griffiths is going to open the questioning.
Thank you. Matthew, taking stock of both the 2024 budget and the Employment Rights Bill, can you give us the business view on how the cost of business is changing?
Of course, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak to you this afternoon. Very helpful to do. So my last stop before Christmas, so a cheerful occasion. For a while now, when we survey our members and ask them what their concerns are around the future competitiveness of the labour market, the number one risk is access to skills. Since the pandemic, the number two risk shooting up has been access to labour, just enough people. Even if we're offering the training, there's not enough people to take it on board. But the number three risk that's been coming through consistently is labour costs. Now, that's not exclusively thinking about wages and benefits. That's the total cost of employing somebody, which is why your reference to the budget is relevant, where particularly the threshold changes in national insurance contributions was a much more surprising factor. That's the bit that caught businesses unprepared and by surprise. So this total envelope for your employment costs is something that's been a real concern around competitiveness. One thing that I think it's important to think about is the relationship between employment costs and your investment and your investment in a company seeking to increase productivity. And it is a common argument, to some extent a cross-party argument, that giving businesses a stronger incentive to invest in productivity would be part of then helping to boost productivity and increase wages. I think what the political debate hasn't caught up with is the extent to which the cost of living crisis and other factors has already driven that right up the agenda. Businesses have a really strong incentive to consider alternatives to just creating more jobs and to try and actually boost productivity instead. We've got a high employment rate, some uncertainty around the quality of the labour market data at the moment, but if anything, it's suggesting the employment rate might be even higher than the official statistics are suggesting. And therefore, if we're going to get growth in the future, it's got to come from productivity growth and business investment. The position we're in is businesses struggling to have the headroom to invest rather than requiring a stronger incentive.
So in light of that answer, how has the government performed so far in producing a coherent package of reforms and incentives to drive up pay and rights at work?
I think at the moment there's a stronger agenda for driving up pay than driving up productivity, and that's part of the challenge. We're finding businesses already having to face into those trade-offs where they lose the headroom to be able to invest. They increasingly are forced to think short-term rather than longer-term. And if part of our challenge is how do we encourage companies to think longer-term and make investments, then being able to break that cycle while at the same time dealing with concerns around living costs is obviously part of the challenge in this mix.
So in your view, what does good look like when it comes to a new settlement for industrial relations?
I think a new settlement for industrial relations needs to recognise the importance of reasonableness on all sides. Mm-hmm. And I think there are some aspects of this bill that can be helpful in that regard. But there are others where it seems the question has been asked of what happens if an employer is minded to behave unreasonably. But it doesn't look like the question has been asked what happens if a trade union might be behaving unreasonably. And I do believe that for the same reason that we have employment law, that's there to protect workers, not because we think all businesses are going to treat people badly, but because a small minority might. The law also needs to think what might happen if a trade union is determined to behave unreasonably as well. And so a number of the changes at the moment fall foul of that test for me.
Can you be more specific?
For example, if we had a result for recognition that was a simple majority of those voting, thousands of workers and 5% of people voted, it's hardly a resounding vote, but it could be possible under these rules. So I think there needs to be a replacement for the support threshold, either retained at its current 40% or considering what an alternative would be, but the extreme result being possible of one person voted for a union, no one else could be bothered to vote, and the recognition happened, is possible under the rules. And therefore things like that would be areas where we would think, how do we make sure that this is something that can be supported, because employers should be working with the chosen representatives of the workers. There should be no undue barriers to workers to be able to join a trade union. They should be aware of their rights. They should be able to exercise those rights. Employers should have to engage proactively and positively with the chosen representatives of the workers. What employers are looking for in return is a guarantee that the people they're speaking to are speaking for a majority of their workforce and not only for a small vocal minority.
Thank you.
Okay, Antonio Batts, briefly.
Thank you very much, Chair. You've spoken about the importance of reasonable behaviour on the part of employers. We've just had 45 minutes talking about the unreasonable behaviour of Amazon at Coventry BHX4 warehouse. Do you think their behaviour was reasonable?
Look, I can't speak to the conduct of Amazon. I know that you've got them later this afternoon. I think the one thing I would say for now is in other examples, when I've spoken to employers, often the picture that they will describe to me will be a very different version of the same events to the one that a trade union would tell their media. And so I think it's important that they're given an opportunity to tell their side of the story rather than me without any facts to weigh in and say what I would think of them.
Ollie Maynard.
Yeah, your comment about reasonableness on both sides strikes a chord. Has the CBI published already some amendments that it would like to see in the bill, or if not, is it planning to?
I'd be happy to share what we've... I mean, partly we've made a submission to the Bill Committee that includes proposed amendments. Right. I know that we're in the hands of the Bill Committee for them to choose when they're publishing their evidence, and I haven't checked whether they've published ours or not yet. But we'd be very happy to share proposals and ideas. I think the thing that we haven't sought to do yet is to stick, say, a percentage and say exactly the right percentage is this, that or the other, because that's a discussion about what's the right balance to be struck here. I think what we're hoping to make sure we can achieve is wanting to have a fuller discussion about those sorts of principles that underpin our framework of industrial relations and how we would ensure that what's put to the fore here is a voice that workers choose.
You said a moment ago that you saw positive things and things that you thought needed to be changed. Just very briefly, what are the good things and what are the things that need to change in the CBI's view?
I'll give you one example. What we're wanting to see of the positives, what we're wanting to see is a democratic discussion within workplaces, genuine worker voice you're encouraged to participate in. At the moment, we have a system that discourages you from participating in a decision for whether or not there's going to be industrial action. So the CBI proposed before the previous government introduced its Trade Union Act, we proposed a support threshold for industrial action. The government's manifestation at the time was a turnout threshold. The challenge is that says if you don't want a strike to happen, don't vote, because then the barrier to the strike happening is higher. A support threshold says if you actively don't want this to happen, vote no, and it will make it more likely it doesn't happen. Whereas at the moment, voting no makes it more likely that it will, potentially, because it's the quirk of focusing on turnout rather than how many people really supported it. Yeah. So a fix there would be positive for encouraging that kind of democratic discussion and decisions being taken within workplaces. Something at the other end, I've already mentioned the 40% support threshold, but I think we've got some real concerns that if that there could be increased tensions in the industrial relations in workplaces. If employers feel that there is a risk that moving to a simple majority means that recognition could go against the wishes of the majority of the workforce, it means they're going to need to put more effort in to make sure their workers aren't upset by an outcome. If they say, I didn't realise this was happening, what's going on? And therefore they will be more actively promoting, make sure you participate in this to get the outcome that you want. And I would imagine that even if that information is relatively neutrally put, the people who vote as a result of seeing the employer's reminder to vote rather than the trade unions are disproportionately going to be people voting no, because those voting yes would already be aware of what the trade union was seeking. And therefore that's going to cause accusations of anti-union organising in workplaces where employers are simply trying to make sure that the whole workforce is engaged in a decision because there's no protection for a minimum level of support before it happens anymore.
Very good point, Tim.
Mr Willmott, your organisation has previously called for the greater public investment into the infrastructure that supports the engagement between employees, other stakeholders and employers. What should that look like? And also, what does our infrastructure look like compared to other sort of comparable economies?
And I think one of the points we try to make is that there's a lot of changes to legislation proposed, but in terms of changing working practices, that's not going to be just achieved through legislation. So, we've suggested that there does need to be a more coherent vision around what does the sort of infrastructure, and what are the key institutions, and how they should be resourced to improve and support a reset employment relations. And a key will be at the sort of foundation level, a functioning labour market enforcement system. So that needs to go beyond just the proposals for a Fair Work Agency, which of course is really important, but we also need to look at the Health and Safety Executive, the Equality and Human Rights Commission. We know that we're under-resourced in terms of the number of inspectors for our enforcement bodies by international standards. We also need to see measures to improve the efficiency of our overburdened tribunal system. And crucially, we need to see more resources for ACAS to help improve their ability to advise and support SMEs, particularly micro and small firms, to comply and to improve their practices. We've also suggested that we need some sort of collective employment relations code of practice that can act as an anchor point for the government's new principles for a modern industrial relations framework, which would set out the key working practices and standards of behaviour that are expected on the side of both employers and managers and trade unions and union representatives on the ground. Because I think that's where we will get conflict, is where, and we know this is one of the challenges for us as a professional institute for HRMP development, those sort of core collective employment relations skills have atrophied over the last 20 or so years. The shift to more individual forms of employment relations means that a lot of our members, who are going to be having to think more closely about partnership working with trade unions, trying to, agree voluntary access to for unions in a way that is done with harmony. We absolutely have a role to improve those collective employment relations skills. But at the same time, the unions there is a need for the unions to look at their own capability to ensure that their representatives on the ground are entering those engagements with employers on a positive footing, looking to foster partnership. Because I think our concern is that there is a danger that without that sort of broader vision and support, including, we talked about the need for more support for the CAC, absolutely we need that as well, that we will end up with more conflict rather than, actually really supportive, productive partnership working between trade unions and employers on the ground in workplaces across Britain.
That's a really helpful survey, Mr. Willmott. Have you actually got a sense of how much extra investment it would take in order to get those different components up to the kind of level we need to get them to? I mean, we've suggested that ACAS's budget should be doubled to from 60 to about 60 to 120 million pounds a year. Say that again for us. To double ACAS's budget from about 60 to 120 million pounds a year. I would suggest that to improve the labour market enforcement system, you're probably in a meaningful way, you're probably looking at 300 million pounds a year. Extra. Yeah. And I think that I think there needs to be a recognition that there will need to be some investment in this. We can't just rely on legislative changes to achieve the reset that we need. So I think that's the point that we have tried when we've been talking to government in the run-up to the Employment Relations Bill and in engagement with key stakeholders. We've tried to make some of those points. Can you see that budget increase at the moment in government spending plans? No, but I think the other point we have made is that there are areas of government spending that seem to get a bit more of a free pass. So if you look at the amount that we spend on R&D tax incentives, we invest more in R&D tax incentives than any other developed economy. And of course, we absolutely need to invest in R&D, not saying we shouldn't, but there are areas of investment like the patent box. Margaret Hodge has highlighted this consistently as a broadly dead weight, as has, there's been various independent evaluations of the patent box. £1.5 billion a year. It is broadly dead weight. It goes to large organisations, and there's no evidence that it provides public benefit or good. We've got to look at. We've made this broader point that
we need to rebalance our innovation strategy from just looking at the cutting edge frontier firms. Rachel Reeves has made the same point.
I'm going to just close off that road at the moment, just because the point is extremely well made, and you think
the
it's
point
about...
I was making, so we need to move to innovation adoption. That's one of our weaknesses. We have poor adoption of good practice in management and technology, so we need to look at this should be part of the debate around the industrial strategy as well.
A really good point. Mr. Poynton, please do.
Last question. Just assume we were to then go forward with that framework and infrastructure that you describe, what do you then see as the benefit to the UK economy and then as a driver for growth?
I think if we know that employee voice is really important, particularly in trends and in organisational change and transition. So, we know that we're going to need to see improvements in technology adoption, and that requires significant changes to how people are managed, in terms of job design, training development, organisational development, change management, and employee voice. And so if we can get this right, and we've also suggested with Prospect Union, we also need to improve sector level partnership working between employers and trade unions to support improvements in collective employment relations, job quality, technology adoption. So I think our view is you need a broader perspective and infrastructure and vision around how we're going to translate these changes in legislation into a broader push to improve the quality of workplace practices more broadly.
Thank you. Joshua Reynolds.
Thank you, Chair. Matthew, you will know that trade union membership has fallen significantly since 2000. So that has now led to businesses saying that unions can't fairly represent their workforce on things like pay and contractual relations. So do you think the UK should look to be changing that relationship, trying to increase that number? And if so, what should we be look at doing?
I think the government should be entirely agnostic to the question, because my principle is workers should choose what representation they want. And it's a really important principle that the UK is signed up to. The freedom of association. The freedom of association means removing those unreasonable barriers to the ability to organise for workers that want to be organised. It also means the ability to choose not to be a trade union member if you don't want to be. The question is, does an individual feel that there is, on a cost-benefit analysis, worth it for them, or for any other reason that they may choose to want to be a trade union member? Because there are a range. In some industries, it will be thinking about, in case you think you might unreasonably be treated in relation to a particular policy. In some places, it might be around wanting bargaining. In other places, it might be around more to do with your personal politics rather than your experience of your employer at work. And any of those reasons are fine for an individual to be able to choose. What an employer's question then is, in response to what the workers choose on an individual basis, is what is the point at which a sufficient proportion of your workforce have expressed an interest in having a collective relationship with you through a trade union that then justifies an employer saying, we will now engage. Now, that already is not a majority, it's already 40%. So we're not standing here saying if there's not an absolute majority of the total workforce that want this, then there's no point in having a conversation, because there are also workplaces with multiple trade unions. You can't have multiple trade unions that both have more than 50% of the workforce as their members. But there's a productive conversation to still have, because you know that you're speaking to a sizable proportion of your workforce. So I'm not speaking about absolute majorities here, but I think the question that an employer is asking is, how do I know when this is a collective enough view and is representative of my workforce such that there's benefit for me in, frankly, shortcutting some of my conversations? Because if I can have a collective conversation, sometimes it can be helpful. I've spoken to some of my members before who have said one of their industrial relations problems is they've got quite a good and constructive relationship with their trade union, but the membership's dwindling within the workforce, which starts to challenge the legitimacy of the relationship a little bit. So I've even seen employers that are worried that the union membership is falling within their workforce because it gives them another headache having to deal with in terms of change. But I think that the important principle is not, does government think that workers should be trade union members, but do workers think that they want to be trade union members? And that should be one where the employer is not taking a controlling approach on the individual, and neither the government.
And do you think at the moment then, obviously the new government is in a very different space to the previous government on this issue, do you think that the place we're in today is the right place to be in terms of that balance between individual employees deciding if they want to be a member and having that freedom to be able to choose individually, or do you think we're not in that right place?
Our response to the government's consultation on the future industrial relations framework warns that we feel that that is not something that's been considered in the current bill. As I said earlier, our concern is that this bill is an answer to the question, what happens if an employer is minded to behave unreasonably with their workforce and with a trade union. It has not sufficiently considered the question, what happens if it is a trade union that is the one that is behaving unreasonably in the relationship with the employer. That is not me saying that I think the majority are or will, but it is to say that it is possible. And the risk is that you don't build a lasting framework with something that has the sorts of examples that can become very discredited because they're obviously a bit silly. In the same way that examples currently of extreme employer practice then become lightning rods for debate saying something needs to change here. If you want to build a lasting framework, then I think it needs to consider better that balance on all sides. And we haven't had that level of sort of time and space to be able to get into that in this bill so far, where a lot of the scrutiny has focused on things like probation and guaranteed hours and these sorts of provisions, where there's good evidence of a good conversation with government. They're starting to respond to those questions. The risk is we've not really had a thorough enough conversation that actually involves some negotiation, dare I say social dialogue, in a context where we're talking about the future IR relationship, that says how do we make sure we strike the right balance here so that preferably we end up with something that trade unions and employers both come out at the end saying we think this is a fair settlement to last for the future, rather than a risk that we end up creating aspects of this bill that look a bit to employers like the Trade Union Act looked to the trade unions, which is let's repeal it at the first available opportunity because it's not a balanced settlement. Let's look and try and achieve something with the moment we've got to build something we can get more of a consensus behind.
What sort of provisions would that take you to if we began considering the kind of gaps that you think are in the bill today? What kind of provisions could you speculate might be needed?
I've already spoken about recognition, so I won't talk about the recognition aspect again. But in terms of other aspects, I think we've seen, I mentioned as well, in our view, the importance of there being a support threshold underpinning the industrial action ballots as well. I think it was a welcome addition from the previous government when they introduced the flexibility into their ballot expiry provision, that you would be able to suspend the expiry of the ballot in circumstances where the employer and the trade union were negotiating a resolution to the dispute, and the imminency of the expiry of the ballot was going to become a potential hurdle to being able to resolve it. You don't want people to sort of feel like they've got to use their chance to be on strike now when it's right in the middle of a sensitive moment of your negotiations. We feel that's an adequate protection.
You were inviting us to follow you in a line of argument around trade unions behaving badly and misusing the legislation, I think, was that you were rehearsing. What kind of provisions would you argue are therefore needed to guard against that risk that you've offered us?
Well, that's where I'm saying some of these measures. So one is around recognition, one is around support for industrial action. Another that I was just explaining then is when we think about how they, perhaps another area would be when they're talking about notice periods for industrial action as well. A number of employers in touch with us with concern around reducing that to 7 days from 14. On the ballot expiry point that I was talking about, I think that's saying I wouldn't want there to be considered to be a norm that disputes take 12 months to be resolved. And I think disputes should be able to progress and evolve significantly such that it's not unreasonable to think that you would be testing workers' view on that ongoing dispute more regularly than only once a year. So it's these sorts of provisions. But legislation doesn't fix everything. I think there's an element, certainly I agree with Ben around the broader point around the atrophy in skill sets. and that being something on all sides that needs to be considered. The non-legislative bit, I think, is you do see a large variance in behaviours towards employers of trade unions, the same as you see a large variance in the behaviours towards trade unions of employers. That can't be fixed with legislation, but I think there is a degree of a convening opportunity for government to think, not in the legislative sense, because you can't legislate for that stuff, but what actually does reasonable and good look like in the government's view, acknowledging that both sides can be unreasonable at times. It was a former chair of ACAS who once said at an event for our members, ultimately employers get the trade unions they deserve and trade unions get the employer they deserve. The question is, how does this IR reset become an opportunity to try and level up the reasonableness on all sides so that whoever in the past has erred on one side or the other, we manage to bring parties back together?
Charlie Maynard.
Thank you. A question for Ben, please. Looking at workers' awareness of rights at work, are employers equipped to try and help their workforce understand their rights, powers and entitlements under the law?
Well, I mean, we've got some data around employer or managers' awareness of employment rights. So from a survey in around 2,000 employers, about a third, just under a third, said that they thought their managers' awareness of employment rights was either poor or fair. About half said that they were good or very good. Smaller employers were more likely to say that their managers were not good, did not have good awareness of employment rights. And of course, it's critical that managers understand employment rights because they're the ones who are going to be, really applying them. Of course, workers need that as well. I suppose I'm just looking at it from an employer perspective, our members' perspective. The other issue that we have got quite a lot of insight is around the awareness that micro and small firms have of employment rights. So we've run a number of HR support pilots in different parts of the UK since 2017, working with local authorities and chambers of commerce, where we've provided, working with our CIPD self-employed HR consultant members to provide the support, an amount of sort of free HR support to small firms. And what we found is that the level of sort of HR capability and understanding around employment legislation is very low amongst these micro and small firms. Many of them, they manage people in a very informal way. Quite often they won't have written employment contracts or terms and conditions of employment. So there's a real challenge around accidental non-compliance. So we've been making the case for publicly funded business support services to have a much stronger focus around HR and people management capability support, because we know that is an area of weakness and an Achilles heel, because your average owner manager, in a micro small firm, they won't have access to professional HR support. Their own knowledge is likely to be limited or fairly ad hoc, and we know that is going to be a real challenge as the measures of the Employment Rights Bill are introduced. So that's an area that I think is a real area of focus that needs to be thought about, and obviously ACAS can play a key role there as well.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to cover about kind of how to drive cultural change in that area of getting smaller enterprises up to speed on these things, or have you already done it?
I mean, I think what we know is that business support of this nature needs to be highly accessible. It needs to be bespoke as well. So the provision of guidance, a guidance document or a tool on the internet is not sufficient typically for an owner manager. They need that. They basically need to talk to someone who can give them that contextualized understanding of the thing that the area that they need to most urgently look at from the people side of their business. So I think that's obviously guidance is really important, but I think there is that need for those businesses that need it at that point of need, the ability to really talk to either an ACAS advisor or a professionally qualified HR consultant who can provide that level of support and expertise.
Thank you.
I have the expression of the need for reasonableness on all sides, and I particularly identify with the point that you've made of the atrophy, particularly of leadership and management skills where it comes to strong industrial relations. I think over the last couple of years I've listened to a number of debates in the House of Commons where it was abundantly clear that very few people had ever managed in large organisations where they routinely dealt with worker representatives and with trade unions. And I hope very much, and I'd appreciate any further details you have to share, to hear about the leadership role your organisations may play in ensuring that our biggest businesses, as well as our medium and small employers, are well equipped for a future where trade unions do have more rights and where they do need to spend time engaging with their workforce productively to ensure that they get the absolute most out of them as we strive for that high growth future that we also very much want.
And certainly from a CIPD perspective, we are having a lot of internal discussions around, what type of education and training can we provide to HR practitioners around those collective employment relations skills. And also, the other thing we'll be looking at will be our profession map and making sure there's enough emphasis in the development of those skills as the next generation of HR practitioners come into the workforce. So I think, it is something that we're really focusing on, and, we'll be talking to stakeholders like ACAS, who provide a really good model of providing joint training for employment relations and HR specialists and trade union representatives together, because I think that's when you get, the best insight often, when you're getting both parties, those different stakeholders, to understand the different perspectives and try and then bring them together and understand how they can work together more productively. So we are very much looking at this, and we'll be doing further work in this area to try and address that skills deficit.
Thank you. So I just want to pin down this question about thresholds, just so we've absolutely got that right. Do you want to put that, or do you think so? The government's proposing sort of between 2 and 10%. I think you haven't got a view about where it lands, but just let me know what you think, Matthew.
So for us, if we're thinking about there's obviously the three changes in thresholds. There's the removal of the simple majority, there's the 10 to 2%, and the removal of the 40%. The top priority for us would be what determines the outcome of the ballot rather than when a ballot is triggered. And therefore that's more important to us in hierarchy. But yes, there are a number of our employers who are concerned that if you move as low as 2%, it starts to get too low, and you may end up with ballots where there's either competing trade unions that all meet the threshold that then gives you a more confused picture. But that doesn't feel like it's a decision that the government's locked into yet, because it's given itself a power to consider it further. Yeah, Ben, any views on that?
I think the important point is that that there should be genuine consultation to try and get the balance right in statutory recognition procedures, so that they are not overly complex and preventing access, but they are also supporting genuine workplace democracy as well. So I think that's the key. Is let's have a proper consultation on this, on the areas that Matthew's been talking about, and because our members definitely have some concern in that area. But I think if we find the right balance, then I think to Matthew's earlier point, we want to find something that is sustainable, that is going to last the test of time. So I think that's really important to get those different views.
I think you'd want to see the different policies when they all get pulled together, and what the cumulative impact as well is, of course, because you've got the questions around right to access that have been discussed already today, changes around e-balloting, hopefully make it easier for people to be able to participate in these sorts of things. So a number of the barriers, the prominence of trade unions in the media, we've had years of higher levels of strikes and more media coverage around the activities of trade unions since the election, much greater representation of trade unions within Parliament. And so I think all of these measures taken together, that's when we should think, right, what does this tell us about whether or not the low level of trade union membership at that point is either that the workers aren't interested in it often, or that there is some undue barrier in the way that prevents the will of the workers from being exercised. Yeah. And I'm quite sceptical about the latter argument.
Well, look, that is both constructive and helpful. Thank you very much indeed. We'd welcome any written evidence you want to supply to the committee before our inquiry concludes. But that now concludes our panel. Order. Order. Welcome to this third panel in our Select Committee's inquiry into the Industrial Relations Bill and industrial relations in the UK. I'm immensely grateful to Jennifer Kearney and Stuart Morgan for joining us from Amazon. You're very welcome here this afternoon, and thank you for making time in a busy schedule to come and give evidence to us. Jennifer, perhaps I can start with you. Does Amazon basically hate trade unions?
I'd like to start with introducing myself and sharing with the committee what I do.
Don't worry, we've got the biography, so
Great.
we're just going to jump straight into the questions because the time is against us. And the question is, does Amazon basically hate trade unions?
Amazon is really clear that our preference is working directly with our employees. It's worked very well for us in the 25 years that we've been inside of the UK. Should our employees choose union recognition, union representation in any way, of course, we'll comply.
Okay. Now, you'll be aware of a report that was published by one of our sister committees in the United States on Sunday by Senator Sanders and others. And in that report, the allegation is that Amazon basically, in the report's words, accepts injuries to its workers as the cost of doing business. Is that true?
I am aware of the report that's been published. At this point in time, I've not had the opportunity to go through the details of that, but I'd like to reassure and state that actually for Amazon, safety is our number one priority. Mm-hmm. It always has been and always will be. And we benchmark ourselves against health and safety executive data. The data for the period 2022, which is published on our safety blog, actually states and proves that Amazon is 50% safer in terms of when compared to other businesses within this sector.
Yeah. I would say
that's 531 injuries per 100,000, and as you say, the last published figures were 2022. Why have they not been updated since then?
So the actual data demonstrates that in 2022 there was 77 million hours worked, which gives you a kind of scale of the size of our operation. Mm. The data on that blog, which is in the process of being updated, demonstrates that actually that is one incident every 132 years. So our priority is safety. And that has always been the case.
The question was, will it be updated? The data that we've last got published is 2022. Are there plans to update that data?
We're in the process of updating the data. We are confident that actually we are making improvements in our safety. So that is demonstrated by the fact that on an annual basis we complete over 350,000 inspections each year. We continue to invest in automation within our network, which is again improving our safety. We engage with our employees through safety committees And all of these are active ways in which we continue to improve. But we're not complacent in this. One single safety incident is too many, and we will continue to improve in this area.
But you're planning to update that data and publish it when, do you think?
I'm not able to confirm an actual date at this point, but the reason that we set up the safety blog back in 2022 was that we wanted to actually be transparent around our record with safety. There are many allegations that have been made around the safety. When those have been investigated, then they've been proven to be untrue. So we saw this as an opportunity in which that actually we could support and help people to understand.
Yeah. Okay. So let me just run through just a few things just to sort of check. So at the moment in warehouses, people work a 10-hour shift. Is that standard?
Our standard shifts are 4 10-hour days, highly desired by our employees. It gives them the balance that they have to live their life. We also offer flexibility so that they can, make a change to their schedule on the spot, which we also see our employees do. We also, of course, employ part-time employees and individuals who are on more flexible schedules. It's one of the things that Amazon does best.
Yeah, and within the warehouses, there is, in a sense, an algorithm that helps set targets for the amount of picking, for example, that a worker might need to conduct on their shift.
In Amazon, we use technology for a whole different range of reasons, as you would anticipate, whether that is tracking goods through different stages of the process within the warehouse, whether that is around the security of our sites, and also, as I've explained, in terms of the introduction of technologies to improve our overall safety. Do we set performance targets? Then, like many other businesses, yes, we do set performance targets.
Yeah. And those performance targets may change day by day?
When we set performance targets, we are thoughtful, we're considerate, we take performance data over an extended period of time so that it avoids looking at specific days or accepting that there are fluctuations. We also are considerate in that we take into account whether the employee is training in a new skill or that they may be learning or at a recently joined the business. So these are all different types of inputs that we take when we're setting what our performance targets are.
And you'll be aware of the allegations because they've been reported by the BBC, that such as people's fear of missing those performance targets and perhaps losing their job, that they are urinating into plastic bottles to avoid taking the time to go to the bathroom. Is that true?
I don't recognize that in the 7.5 years. I don't think Stuart would say the same for his 10 years at Amazon. When we're in our buildings and we talk to our employees on the shop floor who are doing meaningful work for our customers and are proud of their role, they tell us about the way that they feel fulfilled and they're able to provide for themselves and for their families. So simply don't recognize that. Okay,
and Mr. Morgan, you would confirm that you've not heard that allegation either?
I've spent 10 years working in frontline positions, leading buildings across the entire Amazon network. I don't recognize that situation. It is a common myth, which is untrue. We do measure performance of our employees. We do not monitor their movements in the building. We simply track performance when they are on task. And at any point in time that they need to either use the facilities, they need to make an important telephone call, or they have an engagement with a leader, then that is stopped.
Okay. And you'll be aware too then of an observer-led investigation that reported over 1,400 ambulance call-outs in a period of just 5 years. I mean, that indicates an environment that's not terrifically safe to me.
I would disagree with the premise of the question and allow me to explain. So The first point is that if an employee at any point needs medical attention, which is beyond what our capable first aiders can do, would we call an ambulance? And the answer to that would be yes. However, I think it is oversimplistic and not correct to make a correlation between ambulance call-outs and whether an environment is safe or not safe. And if I could share the experience of my time within Amazon and leading buildings, whenever there would be an occasion that an ambulance would be called to site, then I would be informed of that matter, because safety is our priority, as I've stated. And in the majority of those cases, the situation is that for what we would describe as a non-work-related incident or a pre-existing medical condition, and those were for the majority of the cases. So it is an oversimplification to state that a high ambulance call-out rate leads to an unsafe environment. And I would just reinforce the point that I made earlier about our data and how we benchmark against the health and safety executive, which demonstrates...
Most employers don't have to call ambulances 1,400 times in 5 years.
I want to point out that we employ 75,000 employees over 100 locations across the entirety of the UK.
There's 50,000 people work in the Palace of Westminster each day. We don't call ambulances 1,400 times over the course of 5 years.
I think the data that Stuart shared speaks for itself. But as we shared earlier, one incident is too many. So we work actively, hearing from employees, hey, what can we do better or different for you? Every time we have an idea or a concern brought to us, it's our obligation, but it's also our privilege to support them and to make sure that we're doing everything as safely as possible.
Well, if one incident is too many, how would you explain the case that we were given just an hour or two ago of a 30-year-old man who got chemical in his eyes, and we were told that Amazon didn't or wouldn't call an ambulance because there were an excessive number of ambulance call-outs compared to other sites? It wasn't until he got home that he was able to go to hospital, and tragically it was too late to save all his vision, and he now only has 20% vision. Is that a case you recognise?
I don't recognise that specific case. If you have details of that case, then we would write a follow-up. What I can say is that for any incident that does take place, then we conduct a thorough investigation of that.
So it was on the 6th of October, I think, 2022, that Mr. Bezos says that we, Amazon, are going to be the Earth's best employer and the Earth's safest place to work. Is that now true?
We are getting better every day. What you'll see inside of our buildings, and we'd like to invite each of you to come and see either any of our buildings at any point, you'll see a place where we care deeply about employees. When I say we, that's every single one of our site leaders, our HR teams inside of our building. You'll see us continually getting better. As we shared, we're not complacent, even though the data says that we are a very safe place to work. I also shared about some flexibility and some other things employees tell us they cannot get anywhere else. I hear constantly, this is the best place that I've ever worked. And that is from multiple experiences in multiple of our buildings across the entirety of the UK.
Well, let's turn from safety to pay then. I think you've said that you're on a journey to become the Earth's safest place to work rather than you've reached that destination. So when we look at your SEC filings and we look at the breakout for sales in the UK, we can see that between 2018 and 2023, Amazon UK's sales have grown by 132%, but growth in pay for frontline workers has been 42%. So are you basically profiteering from the hard work of employees and not giving them the full measure of their reward?
Now, what I would like to just to reinforce is in terms of where our current position is on pay. And that is both above the real living wage and the minimum wage. It gives the opportunity for our employees working 40 hours a week across 40 days to be earning as a startup or a start position of £28,000 to £30,000. Now, when we set our pay, we go through an annual process and we take into account a number of different factors, including economic data points. We are confident that, and we do benchmark against other businesses, and we are confident that we are offering a fair rate of pay. It's one of the main reasons why employees actually choose to join us as well.
It's not just pay, it's a benefits package that includes personal medical care, income protection, where we go over and above for our employees to make sure that they're choosing us. And the data shows that people want to work at Amazon, not just because of pay, but their total compensation.
So, I mean, when we look at the premium, for example, that you pay over national minimum wage, we can see that September 2024, the premium over minimum wage was about 15% for low-paid workers, about 22% for higher-paid workers. That's now fallen to a 10% premium for lower-paid workers and a 17% premium for higher-paid workers. And I suppose we're looking at that alongside 2023 Amazon UK Services limited profits of 280.5 million. And I guess the question is, who leads the conversation on workers' behalf about how they get a bigger share of that almost £250 million worth of profit?
I think that growth in national living wage is some of the reason why you'll see that too. I think many of us, from a business perspective, have been trying to keep up with how much that's moved over that same time period that you mentioned. When you ask the question, which I love to answer, about who is advocating this direct relationship that Amazon celebrates with our employees, the answer is the entirety of our leadership team, listening through multiple different channels to employee voice and responding. Pay is something that we've heard them say is very important to them, and as Stuart has pointed out, if you ask them why they work at Amazon, that we hear often that's the number one reason, because we pay competitively.
Do you want to add, Mr. Beverley?
I'd like to just kind of reinforce the point about that. Our employees join and stay with us, which is an important point, which is not just based on pay, but also upon the industry-leading benefits package, which Jennifer has talked through. But also, I think another area where we focus is around our skill development as well. We have an internal program called Careers Choice, where Amazon contributes to up to 95% of the fees over a 4-year period to upskill our employees. And that's an important point. And it's one that 20,000 people have now had the opportunity to actually upskill. When I talk about upskilling, that could be anything from HGV driving to cyber security. We have almost 10% of our current employees that are enrolled in that scheme. So I think it's important to take a step back and think about not just pay, but also in terms of benefits and also the focus around how we can help develop a person's skills.
Well, we've just heard this afternoon that there's very few people who work for Amazon for more than 2 years and don't have some kind of injury that they've sustained at work. Is that true?
It's simply not true. It doesn't match my experience. The data also doesn't say that at all. In fact, what we hear is employees are looking for more opportunities to grow inside of Amazon, to learn new skills, to work in different areas inside of our buildings.
Okay, thank you. The challenge we've got, I suppose, is that we've got a company that is rich enough to put a man into space, but we've got very conflicting stories about how safe it is to work at Amazon, and we've got clear evidence that pay has only risen about a third as much of sales. But let's get into some of the issues behind that. Charlie Maynard.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, listening to your statements and what we heard an hour ago, it's starkly different. It's unrecognisable. So we heard about the battle to get off £10 an hour, and yet we've just heard what you said about pay. And then, I guess what really sticks in the throat a bit is the scale of the company. And, in 2023, Amazon paid 18.7 million of current tax on 27 billion of sales, and 932 million in direct taxes on corporate tax, business rates and digital services tax, 3.45% of sales, which is, minimal, and it sticks like an incredibly unfair dynamic between on and offline. And given all that, it just doesn't seem at all reasonable, and you coming in here and saying, they love working here, when an hour ago we've just heard the opposite. I mean, it seems like we're kind of Kafka, kind of...
Just put it to a question, Mr. Maynard.
Do you think it's fair to be paying that little tax in the UK as a company?
What I can say at a high level is that Amazon pays all taxes that are required to do so.
I get it, but the question was, do you think it's fair? If you just a yes or no is good.
So my position on this, and you have read my bio, I'm a HR director. I'm not able to talk in detail about our financial position, our tax position.
If you're not going to give me an answer, that's fine. We'll leave it there.
Yeah, we're going to move it on. Mr. Weston?
Mr. Morgan, you mentioned, you said quite categorically that transparency is important in Amazon as a culture. Can you confirm when was the 2022 health and safety data published? And secondly, do you actually provide performance targets for health and safety within your facilities for employees to see, so they can see what is their performance this year versus last year in terms of health and safety, but also how does it compare to your other facilities in the UK?
I'm not able to confirm an exact date when the health...
You could come back to us, couldn't you?
I could, using the data that was on our safety blog, which is what I referenced in terms of how we benchmark ourselves against Health and Safety Executive. Yes, we're able to confirm that.
And the second point?
The second point is the performance data that we consider, which takes me back to the earlier conversation, is around performance.
Do you publish it in your facilities for employees' visibility?
If the majority of our employees are highly engaged, and my experience is when I'm on the shop floor, then frequently an employee would ask what is their performance level, and if an employee was to ask what their performance level is, that is something that we would share with them.
I understand, but I'm just coming back to your point that you earnestly made, that you said Amazon is a very transparent organisation. I'm not hearing that in your reply.
I don't recall using the word transparent. We talked about the culture of Amazon being a day one culture where we're focused around innovation and that we're focused around employee experience.
If I can jump in there, I wanted to say versus publishing, what would feel very normal inside of one of our Amazon buildings is to have a conversation with your manager. So what's going well? What do I need to improve? Maybe there's an accommodation, maybe there's a barrier, maybe there's an idea, a change to a workstation that we can make to be able to support you. So the conversation is very much one that would take place between two people versus publishing or reporting.
Okay, Antonia Vance.
Thank you, Chair. We heard earlier from some workers at BHX4 in Coventry, and I'm interested that you mentioned that common management practice of talking to employees and giving feedback, providing accommodation where accommodations were necessary. We heard the story of one of your employees at BHX4 who had had a heart attack, was put on duties that were appropriate for what she was able to do, but those accommodations were withdrawn as a result of her union activities. We also heard a number of stories based from that fulfilment centre of workers who had experienced injury at work, being asked to do too much, being asked to to load from the back of vehicles on their own, to lift heavy weights above their heads, and of the rate of injury in that workforce. Is it just the case that Coventry BHX4 is a uniquely dangerous Amazon facility to work in, or is that the case for the rest of the country as well?
I'm going to disagree with the premise of the question altogether, and I want to share a little bit of data. As we heard earlier, often employers would have a different version of events, and as you shared, sir, earlier, unrecognizable would be exactly how those claims are. We've asked employees at the Coventry location 5 times this year, would you recommend Amazon as a great place to work to your friends and family? And all 5 times, 87% of the employees said yes, 87% or more. So what we're describing here is a place where people really do come to work to do a good job. They're choosing this location out of anywhere that they could work inside of Coventry.
May I ask if that's an anonymous question?
Go on, briefly.
Is that an anonymous question you ask employees, so it's untraceable to them and they believe that is...
Absolutely. It's anonymous. It's something that they can answer directly on a device that they're interacting with when they do their work every day.
We come to Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. We've heard a lot today about balance and the need to offset rights and responsibilities on both sides of this equation, employees and employers. Taking into account recent changes in the budget, what's your view of how things are for employers in this country? Is Britain still a good place to do business?
Firstly, the UK is an important country for Amazon. Last year we celebrated 25 years in business here. And across that 25-year time, we've continued to grow and invest. Actually, right now we employ over 75,000 employees. We're one of the largest employers. We've recently been recognised as a top employer from the Top Employee Institution as well. And we've hired over 10,000 additional employees to support our busy period through the Christmas period. So UK is important. We continue to grow and invest in our network in this country.
And then, in light of the changes, then is that you've talked about the past, then? So you've had 25 years here, and that's been 25 good years. What do you think the future is now in the current circumstances? Do you think that's changing? Have you another good 25 years here?
So we have a strong customer base here. We have an established network here. Our investment decisions are complex, as you would appreciate. I'm not here to share or not able to share any details around future investment decisions, but the fact that we've now been in the UK for 25 years and we continue to invest, I think that's an indication.
So if it's just interrupted, demand's obviously there, the customers are there, that's clear. What's your view of the environment in which you do business, the rules that you've got to abide by, things like that? Is it a hostile environment? Is it becoming a hostile environment? Has the pendulum swung away from you towards the employees rather than employers?
With our cloud computing business, Amazon Web Services, has announced this year that we'll invest £8 billion over the next 5-year period. And that was something that was recognised by the Chancellor. Amazon has also recently attended the Growth Summit. So again, demonstrating how we are willing and to work constructively with this government and with Parliament around future benefits for this country.
Okay, Charlie Maynard.
Thank you. You mentioned 100 locations. What proportion of those have got union engagement currently?
We don't currently, or nor will we ever track union membership, so I'm not able to answer that question.
Okay. Do any locations have a union? They may have union members in them, but do they have an organised union inside the location?
Recognition? No, we have over the 25 years that we've been doing business here, not had a site vote for union recognition up until this point.
Thank you. Okay. And what's your response to the proposed changes to industrial relations as part of the Employment Rights Bill?
I think it's well, firstly, I'm fully aware that within the bill there are a number of areas that are being discussed, and we think that it's important that we get these decisions right. We do think that it's a matter for government and for Parliament to decide upon. We, of course, would comply with any changes that were made. Listening to the CBI and having the opportunity to read their report. Their recommendation around additional independent review and further consultation within those, we think that we can certainly see the benefits of that, because we think that it would be right that we get these decisions correct.
Are there any parts of the proposed legislation that you're particularly concerned about?
The CBI indicated the reduction in the strike notification period from 14 to 7 days. Whilst we respect the rights of our employees to strike and understand that that can be disruptive, then that reduction from 14 to the 7 day does create additional challenges. During the ballot at Coventry and strike action, we continue to maintain our operation because the majority of our employees wanted to continue to attend work, and we also wanted to be able to continue to provide and support our customers. So a reduced notification period then leads to additional challenges potentially could then impact and increase safety risk. So, but I think the CBA has kind of articulated that.
Anything else that's particularly concerning?
There's a lot of places we're still wanting more information, and we're listening really carefully, learning as we progress to see where things land. Obviously, we'll comply and we'll work really productively wherever it lands.
Thank you.
Joshua Reynolds.
On that point, you mentioned strikes. If Amazon's such a great place to work, as you've said, that's what you hear time and time again from your team. Why have your team in Coventry gone on strike so much?
I think it's important to note that we absolutely support their right to do that.
That hasn't answered the. Excuse me. I've obviously we've sat here for quite a while now. I feel like I might need to get lessons from you both at some point in how to not answer the question that was asked directly. If you're that good an employer that you've explained to us so far, why have your workers in Coventry gone on strike so much?
I think they're executing their rights as we absolutely would protect their ability to do. I've shared some data around that building about how employees are telling us it's a great place to work. What I would love to do is invite you, sir, to come and see the building yourself.
I really apologise for interrupting you. My question was why. You haven't answered why. You've told me that, again, it's a great place to work and you've got all this data and I'd love to come and see what you do. Yes, but why? That's the one thing you haven't answered yet, which is the question I actually asked you. Why?
I think that's a good moment for me to, again, extend the invitation.
But it's a good moment for you to not... No, sorry, I'm really sorry. I'm going to really push this point.
Okay.
It's a great opportunity for you to not answer my question. If you are such a great place to work, and I'd like to congratulate you, you said you won an award recently on being a great place to work. If you are that great a place to work, why have your workers in Coventry gone on strike so much?
Our employees have the right to join a trade union or not to join a trade union, and we totally respect that.
I'm pulling teeth at this point. Neither of you answered that question so far. I'll ask it once more.
Yeah.
I'll ask it once more and then I'll give up because I don't think I'm going to get an answer. Why have they gone on strike so much? What is the reason behind it? You talk to workers every day, you've told us, and that's what your teams do. So when you ask them, why are you going on strike? What's their answer back to you? Why are they striking?
They were demonstrating their right to support the trade union that they were a member of, simply put.
Oh, sorry. Supporting a trade union isn't a legal reason for people to go on strike. What was the legal reason that they went on strike as set out in the paperwork that needs to be supplied to the employer in the relevant notice period?
You mean the ballot for strike action?
Yes, that's right. What was the legal reason?
There are multiple scenarios over the recognition attempts that the GMB has made.
We're not talking about recognition. We're talking about the 37 days of industrial action at BHX4 in Coventry. Paperwork needs to be supplied to the employer that lists the reason for strike action. What was the reason given for strike action on those 37 days in answer to my colleague's question?
Mr. Morgan?
Please repeat the question.
In order to take industrial action, a union needs to win a ballot. In order to have a legal ballot, they need to supply to the employer some paperwork that lists the reason, and it needs to be a legal reason. Supporting their union is not a legal reason. It needs to be a legal reason as to why they wish to take strike action for that ballot to go ahead and be lawful and not be challenged in the courts. What was the legal reason on the paperwork supplied to you why your workers at Coventry BHX4 went on strike?
That's one I would be willing to write back on. I don't have the information top of mind, or I can't recall it. We have been, over the series of 2 years, working with the GMB through this process. So we have responded back and forth for several claims, several allegations, I would say, that simply we don't recognize. So please let me come back on that one.
Okay, Mr. Morgan, you don't know why the people went on strike?
I think, just to reinforce Jennifer's point, that we'll write back on that. I don't have that detailed point.
Okay, you're required to be open with us as a committee. You're sure you don't want to lay out why the people went on strike now?
I guess I fully understand our responsibilities as in front of the committee.
Okay, Rosie Wrighting.
Thank you. So what level of access does Amazon currently permit to union representatives at its warehouses and fulfilment centres?
Okay, so actually we have a level of interaction not just with the GMB but other unions as well. Any union members have the right to be represented at different meetings, and if that's the case, then we have unions on our sites on a basis when those meetings take place. Our position is aligned with other businesses within the private sector. We comply with the current regulations within this area.
And can I just confirm what level of access the unions have to your sites?
So in terms of access, could you clarify the question?
Access into your fulfilment centres and warehouses, at what levels are the unions able to come in at this time?
Currently, the access would be that they would have access in order to enable the meeting to take place with the union member and a member of the leadership team for that building.
The other part of the law states that we obviously would grant access as part of an access agreement as you move through the ballot period.
You've currently got no live access agreement because there's no live ballot period. So the answer to the question at the moment is no access, yes?
At this point, there is no access, but our position is no different from other businesses, and we're compliant with the current regulations. Now, if that access was to change, and I know that it is a point of consideration on this bill, then we would comply with that.
And sorry, you just mentioned that the unions come in for meetings. Yes. Do you feel that you create a positive environment when the unions are coming in to the warehouses and fulfilment centres? Are they welcomed in your buildings?
I think that trade unions have an important role to play. And all of our employees have the right to choose as to whether they're a member or not. In Amazon, our preferred way of doing business is through direct engagement with our employees, and we think that creates a more positive and engaging environment.
Okay. Antonia Vance.
Thank you very much, Chair. The GMB described to us a campaign of intimidation and interference at Amazon in response to attempts by its members to achieve union recognition at BHX4 in Coventry. What measures did you apply to put management's view to workers?
We were focused on executing a free and fair ballot process at this site. A couple things to note. Over 25 years of operation here in the UK, this is the first time that Amazon has ever actually been brought to a ballot period. So there was a ton for us to learn. Successfully so, I can tell you that we had 87% of the population inside a very large building with 3,000 people exercise their right to vote in the ballot period, which we feel very proud about. Not only that, we made sure that we were providing information and support. We had tons of questions that were coming our way from employees and some misinformation that we absolutely felt a responsibility to clarify.
How much did you spend on materials, consultants and other payments in response to the July 2024 ballot for statutory recognition? Your colleagues in the US, where they operate in a different industrial relations environment, as you will be aware, spent $14.2 million in 2022 attempting, unsuccessfully, to defeat union recognition attempts in the United States. How much did you spend in the UK?
There was a cost to this as a business, as you would expect. An example of that would be that we gave pay time off to all of our employees to enable them to vote and also to attend information sessions. Our priority throughout this entire process was ensuring that our employees had the information that was available to them to make that decision, and Jennifer talked about the turnout for that. It was also the first time that we'd been through this process in our 25-year history, and thereby we ensured that we wanted to get the right level of support, guidance, to enable us to ensure that we followed that process. That entire process was overseen by an independent assessor appointed by the CAC. And we followed that process in a fair and free way.
Of course, you could have saved yourself all the money you did spend by just doing voluntary recognition of the union, which would have been the approach that most employers would have taken. Now, I would say, I understand that your lawyers are Eversheds, is that right? And that one of the ways in which you spent money in the course of the recognition battle that you fought to prevent GMB getting recognition in that workforce was by asking Eversheds to do your job as managers, by undertaking all of the communication with the union on your behalf. Don't you think you could have saved that money and engaged with the representatives of your workforce directly?
As I think this body knows, this is a very complicated process, and it is very important that diligence is demonstrated through the entirety of the process in order not only to get it right from a legality standpoint, but also to deliver the right experience for our employees. So I think the answer to that question is we used a lot of care to make sure that the process was executed completely free and fair.
Sarah Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. In 2023, Amazon made about $575 billion in global sales, and that equates to being the 25th largest economy, equivalent to Ireland or Argentina. So a lot of power there, perhaps a lot of imbalance, we might say. You mentioned earlier about wanting to operate a free and fair ballot. So I just wanted to ask a few questions about perhaps the access, the equal access to different ways of communicating with people. So I'm going to start firstly by asking, how many meetings did you hold with workers at BHX4 to express the management's view in the ballot in the run-up to July of 2024?
We meet with our employees regularly. Our managers inside of our sites have, as we share, this direct relationship. So we have a process called Team Connects where we meet with our employees. We have start of shift briefs where we talk about the plan for the day. It is a very normal part of doing business at Amazon inside of our warehouses to speak directly to employees. So it would be
this is about expressing the views of the ballot, specifically the question, not about what you generally talk about day to day in dealing with, obviously, running the business. So specifically the management's views, how you express those and how many times you met employees in meetings to express those views.
Simply put, any time an employee would ask us a question, we would answer. So that
you didn't organise any meetings with them directly and invite them to them?
We had multiple touch points with employees to answer the questions, not only about the actual process itself, but what a trade union could and could not deliver for them. Moments that were, again, there was an opportunity to clarify misconceptions or misinformation.
Did you agree a set number and then give the union the same set number to make that free and fair?
The access agreement was agreed by the GMB.
You have to agree to it as well?
Absolutely. It was,
So did you play by those rules or not?
It would be a really tough one for that question. I think the premise of it is what I'm arguing with. We talk to our employees constantly. So comparing
it's a simple question about how many times you organised meetings, which would be diarised. So you would have a list of how many times you had done that with employees. Because that's what the union would have to do in response.
Yeah, once again, every time an employee were to ask us about what this meant for them, we answered them as transparently
you had unlimited
as
access to express management's views on the ballot, is what you're saying?
What we're saying is that our entire approach to our industrial relations is based around direct engagement with our employees, and that we do that constantly through many different formats on a day-to-day basis. I think kind of what we recognise, and the point here is that actually we agreed the access with the GMB that was negotiated, and we followed that to the word, and that entire process was overseen by an independent assessor, and at no point was a formal complaint raised during that period or within the qualifying period.
So what about the internal apps, the TV screens, the notice boards that you could make use of? Did you allow the GMB to make use of those as well to make sure that it was a free and fair ballot?
As part of the access agreement, the GMB did have TV screens. They had a table available to them where they could provide not just the information on a poster, but on a pamphlet. We had 84 sessions of 45 minutes each inside of our building for them to speak directly to our employees. As well as during the access period, any employee at any point could speak directly with the GMB in a surgery-style small group conversation as well.
They were allowed unfettered access? They could speak with them at any point, anytime they wanted.
The unfettered, I would say, it's agreed as a part of the access agreement exactly how the process works.
Okay, that's very different to the story that we heard earlier and the types of messages that were put on those screens and the access that they had to tools and availability. So I'm interested that you think that they had that when they categorically clearly did not.
I think this is an opportunity to clarify the actual situation. As we've explained, we followed a process which was negotiated in terms of access. The entire process was overseen by an independent assessor, and at no point was any formal complaints made about access within the qualifying period.
And finally, did you bring any additional workers in to work for Amazon during that period of time? So you changed the number of people that worked for the company during the time that you received the notification for recognition?
So Amazon is a retail business. It's seasonal and demand changes throughout the entire year. Thereby, our overall headcount, the number of employees within a building, not just Coventry, but at any across the network, changes from time to time.
The timing was just completely happenstance, that the number of employees raised significantly during that time period?
There were a number of additional factors which impacted upon the headcount within Coventry.
Can I just jump in there? I would argue with any raising of the headcount we were very transparent with the bargaining unit. We have to communicate that obviously to the CIC, and from the point where the actual recognition request was filed in March to the point of the ballot in July, the bargaining unit had actually decreased in size.
But in the prior year, when the GMB sought statutory recognition in May-June 2023, the bargaining unit, which stood at 1,400 at the point that they sought statutory recognition, increased to 2,749 in just 27 days. Now, is May-June a peak period of the year for you in your business, such that it would need an increase of 93% in the bargaining unit during that period? Or was that a transparent attempt to manipulate the rules to ensure that statutory recognition couldn't be achieved?
Throughout the year, there are a number of what we would describe as high-volume sales events, such as Black Friday.
November.
We also have early spring deals. We have summer deals.
Early spring deals. Is that in June?
We have 4 across the year, but the point here is that the Coventry building is a unique building. It plays an important role in terms of our operation. If you were to visit that building, you would note that we don't store goods or inventory in that building. Actually, we bring goods in, and then the purpose of the building is then to spread the goods across our network. As a result of that, in terms of the operational cycle or when we have high volumes going into that building, that is different to when actually you would expect a sale to be taking place.
I welcomed the opportunity to respond to the number of 1,400. So that is a GMB reported number and is simply not the actual headcount at that time period.
How much was the headcount, and what was the increase that you shipped in to ensure that the opportunity for statutory recognition was frustrated in May 2023?
The premise of the question is one I have to disagree with. So I think Stuart did a wonderful job explaining exactly why and how we staff based on volumes, how important the Coventry location is for us. I simply wanted to make the point that we provided the headcount in the bargaining unit transparently to the CAC through the duration, the entirety of the process, and never was that 1,400 number an Amazon reported headcount number.
Those could be numbers you could supply to us.
I'll take the request away happily.
Okay, thank you. Very good point.
Yeah. One of the things you'd said earlier was that you think Amazon's the best place to work, but we've heard earlier some cases where that simply isn't the case. I would be keen for you to take those away, and would you commit today to doing that, the specific examples that were raised in the earlier session, and speaking to the GMB, and if those individuals are happy to share their details with you. Firstly, that they will be completely safe in doing so, that they will not face any retribution and coming forward with those specific cases. For example, the person who had had a heart attack and their accommodations had been taken away and changed. And I would like you to come back to me with all the details of those individual cases and what you're doing to put those right.
We would be
that is the
happy
only
to.
way that you can come into this committee today and say that this is a good place to work. Because in that macro, you may come back with statistics, but there are specific people coming today and putting their case to you. And I want to hear from you the specific responses that you have to them.
We would be happy to. We care deeply about every single one of our employees, and so the specifics would allow us to do our due diligence and come back.
Thanks. I just want to come back to the question that Mr. Cooper posed at the top of this session. So you co-signed a letter to the Chancellor on the 18th of November on the economic consequences of the budget on UK retail. That was a letter that was coordinated by the British Retail Consortium. Were there any other points in that letter that you felt very strongly in agreement with that you wanted just to give to the committee?
Amazon, like any other business, benefits from a healthy economy, stability and confidence. And I think out of that letter, which we were a co-signatory of, it highlights some of the concerns that we had around the changes with the national insurance contributions and the impact that would have on cost. But at this, I don't have any additional input other than what's outlined in that letter.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there are a number of matters on which Amazon representatives have agreed to write back to the committee. Would you care to summarise them?
I will summarise them in a letter that will be sent after this committee meeting.
Very much.
Once we have the Hansard in front of us. Jennifer Stewart, that concludes our session. We're so grateful for you coming to giving evidence for us as we try and light up the key issues at stake in this bill. I think most of us will be quite surprised that this is a £27 billion company in the UK. You've got a subsidiary that is making £250 million profit in and of itself. There are, on the record, quite high calls out to ambulances, to support staff. There are sales that are growing 3 times faster than frontline wages. There's a remarkable lack of agreement between the evidence you've given us and the evidence that we've heard from others. And there is, frankly, a bewildering lack of grasp on the reasons for what was a really extensive strike to hit one of your facilities. So we will write to you with some follow-up questions, but this now concludes this panel and this session. Order. Order. Welcome to this final panel of today's hearings into the Employment Rights Bill and Industrial Policy. We are so grateful to you for joining us and for your patience and forbearance this afternoon as we run slightly late. And Gregor Poynton is going to open the questioning for this panel.
Great, thanks. This one to all of you, please. What do you think of the changes to industrial relations outlined in the Employment Rights Bill and the wider consultation framework on industrial relations?
Dominic, do you want to start?
I start?
Yeah.
So
sure.
let me just briefly introduce myself. I'm the Group Employee Relations Director of BAE Systems. And to give you a little bit of context about our industrial relations, we recognise trade unions across about 30,000 of our UK employees, out of 47,000 overall. We work with the GMB, we work with Unite, we work with Prospect, under the umbrella of the Confederation of Shipbuilding and Engineering Unions. So we recognise unions very widely. We see those relationships as a real asset for our business, and we work very collaboratively with those unions to drive forward the success of the business, but also to continuously improve the workplace experience, the quality of terms and conditions of employment for the workforce.
And the perspective on the bill?
On the bill, look, I think we fully understand the intent behind this, to drive broader collective bargaining across the economy, to strengthen the rights of trade unions, to bring greater balance to the workplace. I think the key question from our perspective will be, does that result in more positive partnership-style industrial relations at scale across the economy? Does it result in driving productivity improvements that then support better wages and better terms and conditions? I think one of the things that we've been really pleased about is the tone that the government has set around this, that they've talked about the importance of social partnership, they've talked about the importance of collaborative industrial relations. I think those are things that we've always found important within the company. I've worked with trade unions for over 25 years. I think that way of working is the key to success, where trade unions and the employer understand the importance of the long-term success of the company, and that is the basis for sharing in that success for the workforce with better job security, better terms and conditions of employment over time.
That sounds like a broad welcome.
So as a broad package, it's certainly something that we would be supportive of as a company, and because we recognise trade unions so broadly, I think the impact on us will be much more limited than it will be for some other companies.
Okay. Who wants to argue for JLR?
I'll go with the start, thank you. So,
Thanks, Paul.
in sort of similar vein, similar amount of employees supported, so 34,000 in the UK, 124,000 in our supply chain. We work with United and GMB through the Joint Negotiation Committee. We're representing our workers across our site, and I think Beverley will sort of make more of that. We're happy to support the government's ambitions as set out in the plan to make work pay, to raise the standard across the economy and support productivity. We also share the view that good employment is a core pillar of the growth strategy in there, and employment reforms and wider reforms that impact employers, must support those growth ambitions. However, we do think it's right that the bill does undergo due scrutiny in there and avoids those unintended consequences. And I think if I echo a little bit of degree of nervousness, it's around the extent of the delegated powers within the bill, which poses considerable uncertainty over how the actual operational effect of some of the well-meaning direction is actually operationalised in there. I think it's more likely to be felt on smaller businesses, and that is the majority of our supply chain. So, but as a large employer, JLR are not immune to that, especially if the supplier can't swallow that cost. That just is passed directly back to us. So we're grateful for the opportunity to contribute to the session, and we feel it important that we work hand in hand, the government works hand in hand with business, but we need to make sure that right policy environment supports a strong workforce, but it doesn't lose sight of the urgent requirement for growth enhancing policies more broadly as well.
Yeah, that's a very important point. Beverley, do you want to add anything to that?
Thank you. Yeah, we feel that collaboration with the trade union is an important part of how we do business, and it's an important part of how we listen to the employee as stakeholder. That's vital to the way we do business. But as we look at the bill specifically, we believe that some parts of it we need to consider carefully during its scrutiny phase, particularly around, for example, the threshold for union recognition, which, again, as Murray was saying, the delegated power of between 2 and 10%, that potentially for small companies and potentially for ourselves, that's quite a small number of people who could have additional unions joining what's already a very established collective bargaining arrangement. So at the moment we recognise GMB and Unite, but for us, very approximately, that would be about 700 people within our team could decide to have a completely different arrangement, and that could prove quite problematic. At the moment we share significant business information to the trade union, and to allow them to buy into a future narrative that's about a long-term legacy for JLR in the UK. So to destabilise that with very small numbers of people being able to begin to add into that collective bargaining state might be of concern. So that did leave us with a little concern.
Anything else you wanted to flag?
Particularly with regard to the notice periods, Murray was talking about the supply chain and the complexity of the JLR supply chain. We're a very capital-intensive business, and we have a wide supply chain. We have a 14-day notice period at the moment. We haven't, I'm pleased to say, had any industrial action at JLR for quite some time, but in our supply base there is, and the ability to have enough time to prevent some of the parts arriving and creating a bottleneck for 14 days. It's still not long, but to move back to 7 would be problematic for some of those companies. It gives it less time, and I couldn't see myself that it really restricts the union's ability to have collective action or restricts their ability to impact the business, and therefore it seemed that it was something that could be easily remedied to keep with the same period of time.
Quick follow-up.
Sure.
Let's do JLR then, BAE Systems. You both, in your answers, talked about productivity and good working relationships, supporting productivity and growth. In terms of the bill itself, is there anything that gives you cause for concern in terms of investment for JLR over the course of this Parliament and then BAE Systems too?
Concerns are rather a strong word. I think as we were looking at this and how it might impact productivity, because the automotive sector, it's capital intensive, it's investment heavy, so we need to be able to justify that. Earlier parts of the bill talk to people with variable hours, potentially having those hours and notice for changes of those hours changed. It's very common practice in the automotive sector to have top-up hours on top of an already full-time contract. So I don't believe that's what's the ultimate intent of this bill, but those kinds of unintended consequences for a business that needs to be flexible, needs to offer competitive investment opportunities, and to be competitive with other car companies around the world is important, and that's being able to quickly flex up and down when we hit a difficulty through the week is really important to automotive. So that somewhat concerns, perhaps a strong word.
Dominic?
So I think we've got enormous programmes to deliver. So we've got an order book of over £70 billion. We have to invest in our programmes. We've got over 6,000 young people in our early careers programme, over 4,500 young apprentices coming through. That investment is critical to the future success of the company and to deliver those programmes for our customers. So I don't think the provisions in this bill will change the trajectory of that investment. I do think that there are some nuances that it's important that are got right through the consultation process and the review of the bill. So one of those relates to day one employment rights. And I certainly welcome the idea that there is a simple process that an employer can go through in the event that they've made a hiring mistake. I think lots of companies will be risk averse in taking on staff, particularly where they feel that somebody doesn't have necessarily the ideal skills match for the role, if they feel that they may then be tied up in lots of litigation subsequently. So I think it's important that the balance is appropriately struck in that area of the bill in particular.
John Cooper.
Just following on from that then, so you say that you're quite confident that your sort of hiring programme is going to continue. But are you, in light of recent fiscal changes, are you facing more difficulties with that hiring programme?
Well, if I take our apprentices, I mean, we had over 20,000 applications for apprenticeship at BAE Systems in the last round over a few months ago. So I think in terms of attracting people to come and work for us, no. It is a very tight labour market for many of the skills that we need to employ to deliver these programmes. So, the sort of trade skills, electricians, pipe fitters, engineers, technologists, the market's very competitive. But, I think the proposition that we're able to offer is also a pretty unique one. The types of products that we make, the programmes we deliver, but also the purpose of the company, its criticality to defending the UK and the way we work with the Ministry of Defence. That seems to attract people very successfully. And of course, we continue to invest in our workforce. We recognise that they are absolutely critical to our success as a company. So I think we're confident that we will continue to grow employment as we deliver those programmes.
Thank you. Turning to JLR then, what I've heard a lot in my rural constituency about the changes to national insurance contributions and the effect that that's having. Now, I'm talking about very small and micro businesses. I just wonder what it's like for you as a very large business, what you're seeing in terms of those NIC contributions, the difference that's making to you, and if you can give me some clue, you won't obviously be party necessarily to detail from outside firms, but within your supply chain as well as your direct employees.
Yeah, so we haven't had time to assess how it will affect our supply chain and the pass-through costs, but undoubtedly they will be there. We have an idea of the national insurance contribution increase in there, and that has had the effect that we're having to unwind some investment that we were planning to make in the business over the next 5-year period. In there, I don't think it's appropriate to sort of go into numbers in the public forum, but say it's a significant sum of money, and we understand the situation that the government finds themselves in there, but and equally this is why we need to balance these sorts of fiscal changes with these growth enhancing policies so that we can grow our way back out of the situation we're in, and that's really what we're keen to see next from government.
Okay. Beverley, did you want to add anything to that? No?
Yeah, I think that the important thing for the automotive sector is to make sure that we've got a strong manufacturing sector backed by strong skills and strong engineering sector, and that to do those things, as Murray's saying, we need to be a competitive proposition, and of course money that we've spent on the national insurance, which we will spend, can't be spent on other things. So there will of course be an impact, but the overall competitiveness of the country and the ability to have an automotive sector that's got access to high skilled employees and a great environment for business is the important part in the long term.
Following on from that then, what do you think about these new changes then? What do you think about the broader, the joined up thinking, if you like, if I can use that old cliche about the government? How do you think the government's changes are affecting the overall atmosphere, if you like, for business in the UK? Is it better or worse, do you think?
It is currently worse. There's no getting away with that, but equally I don't think we've seen the full picture yet in there, so we're relying a lot on what the industrial strategy will push out. So I think the employment rights bill raises the high water mark, and all boats should raise with that, but we need to see those compensations in that growth strategy that the industrial strategy will bring along, and we're really keen to play a part in doing that. I think in the fiscal environment, the national insurance, and this is the joined up picture that we're really looking for, and this is what we really want through from the government in there. The budget gave us some setbacks. So the national insurance contributions was one. The very surprise announcement that employee car ownership schemes were coming under scrutiny, which have been around for decades and play a significant part in vehicles coming to the market in there, and increased uncertainty. And the continued delay to the ZEV mandate consultation that we've been asking for since July. So this is the sort of wider environment that we need to improve the connections on and make sure that thinking across government departments really connects with each other, and the picture painted to business is one of that pro-growth, pro-investment environment. So it's really a case of nobody doubts the ambition, but we need to increase the clock speed, because as the uncertainty persists, we still need to make those investment decisions.
Okay. Thank you. Was I mentioned there of raising all boats? Is it raising BAE's boats? You literally make boats, obviously. Warships, more accurately.
Yeah, we make frigates, of course, on the Clyde. We make submarines
and submarines
in Barrow. Was there a specific boat-related question?
No, just.
I'll permit it, Mr. Cooper.
I may say my father's a marine engineer, but I get seasick in a bath, so boats are not my favourite thing. But I just wonder if your position is slightly different for you, because obviously defence spending is increasing given international events at the moment. I just wonder if you're insulated a little bit from some of the difficulties that, for instance, the automotive sector is facing.
Well, in the context of the current threat environment, of course, we are seeing increases in our programme delivery. But of course, the employer national insurance increases, they are a cost impact. They're a cost impact directly to us, but also through our supply chain. I think we're in the process of reviewing how we're going to manage that cost impact. We've got a very price-sensitive customer, of course, looking for value for money. So we will need to be very thoughtful about how we address some of those costs. I think the employment bill, because we've taken a very progressive approach to our employment policies, the employment bill doesn't directly increase our costs, but it's more the national insurance increase that will affect us.
Yeah, thank you. Briefly, Charlie.
Well, that's almost exactly the question. So taking 4 things. This employment rights bill as is, labour costs, access to labour and access to skills, where does this sit in terms of the scale on your business, scale of impact on your business or trouble, headaches caused? I'm trying to get a context of kind of quite how big this is compared to all those other things going on out there for you. So I said labour costs, access to labour, access to skills, and that bill.
Mr. Johnson.
So, labour costs have been a challenge for us, as they have been for most employers over the last few years because of the period of high inflation and the cost of living increases that we have had to make to our employees. But I think actually our number one challenge is skills. We have seen, as I mentioned earlier, a very tight labour market in terms of engineering, technology and trade skills. That's why we're investing so much in our early careers programmes. But in terms of our ability to source experienced hires in those areas, it is very challenging. So I would say that's probably our top priority.
And Murray, relative impact of this compared to other changes that are coming?
I'm going to defer to Bev on that one.
Okay. The inflation over the last couple of years has increased our labour costs significantly, and that was more significant than the impact of probably this bill in that order. In terms of access to labour and skills, the major challenge that we face in automotive is the transition to EV. The transition of those skills will be significant. We've got a large number of people in our early careers scheme, but we don't yet know, because of the uncertainty of the legislative landscape, how quickly some of those things will happen. Yeah. So it is very difficult to plan at the moment how many people will be needed and in which skills and how quickly the transition will take place. Yeah. So I think the overall labour cost increase and the uncertainty about how quickly those new skills will be required is probably of a larger scale than this bill in and of itself. For us at the moment, I think.
Very helpful. Sarah Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. You've touched on it a little bit, so there's just an ability to, I think, give a bit more detail to what your approaches are to industrial relations. So can you sort of describe, BAA versus JLR and just give a bit of a flavour? And then the second part is just to ask whether or not you sort of anticipate any change to your approaches due to the bill coming through.
Well, I'll answer that last bit first. No, I don't think so. I mean, we have very well-established trade union relationships, and our aim is to work with the trade unions in partnership at every level of the business, from the chief executive down to the shop floor level. And we work very collaboratively across 3 trade unions. I'm not going to sit here and suggest that there's never any friction in the relationship. This is industrial relations. Adults. There are difficult issues, but I think the way in which we have taken a sort of joint problem-solving approach to those issues over the years has stood us in good stead, and we haven't, as a result, had industrial action in the company in decades.
Around approaches, so that sort of whether you change them, and then also just describing your sort of current approach to industrial relations, being a bit of colour into that picture.
Yeah, no problem. We won't be changing our industrial relations approach. I've been working with the trade union at JLR for over 20 years now. We have got a joint negotiating committee that supports us across the business in every site. We have full-time representatives at every site. And we have a committee at each site that look locally at the issues. Yes, of course, there's a significant amount of business change that we have to do. It's a fast-moving sector. There's always a lot of business change. And as the economies in the different parts of the globe where we operate go up and down, the volumes go up and down, and there is friction if we have to make change. But we have a collaborative relationship. We value the partnership with Unite and GMB. We share very significant business information at least quarterly and sometimes more regularly, and we have meetings between the CEO and the board members and the senior members of Unite and GMB extremely regularly. It's very important that they also see our future products, the future lineup. We have travelled around the world showing our retail network, the manufacturing network, the supply base, to make sure that we've got a really thorough understanding of our business. It's important that we take, since the Tata acquisition of JLR, I said the unions have been an important part of some of the agreements we've made to make changes and to make changes to our working practices. Some of those have secured jobs both in the Northwest and in the Midlands, but in manufacturing and of course as a knock-on in engineering. So we have daily interactions with the trade union and very regular business sharing at a depth that I think surprises most people that come to view us. We have visitors regularly from other people to see how we do it, and they are always amazed how deep and how confidential the information is that we share, because our relationship is based on trust. And that trust is only built up over a long period of time with real professionalism on both sides, despite the inevitable difficulties as day to day.
Would you describe it more as a partnership?
It's not a partnership in a legal sense, but yes, partnership in an emotional sense, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Weston?
Yes, very good to see you, and thanks very much for what is a very pleasant to hear how good industrial relations can be. Question for you, Ms. Fairbank, and I have to say that a lot of my constituents are very happy about the 11% pay award that you made over 2 years. Just how effective was the existing legislative framework for collective bargaining in helping you deliver that?
I found no issues with the existing collective bargaining arrangements.
Do you think that any of the changes that are being introduced, other than the ones you've already described, if you were, say, a year and a half ago, faced with the challenge of this 2-year deal, what impact do you think the changes in the Employment Rights Act, what impact would that have had in the negotiation, do you think? Would you have had a similar successful outcome?
Probably. I think we would have very much appreciated the opportunity for an electronic ballot. We talked to the trade union about electronic balloting at the time.
I couldn't hear the words you said.
Sorry, electronic balloting.
Okay,
so that would really have helped us from a timing point of view, and we'd have been able to do a number of process steps more quickly, which I think would have helped members, but it proved too problematic from a variety of areas. But we would have really enjoyed the opportunity to do that. I don't really believe that any of the other changes would have made any change to what we did.
Okay.
Is it okay?
Yes, of course.
I was a little surprised when I looked at the bill as proposed at the moment that there wasn't a more strategic approach to what the private sector bargaining approaches might be and how the role of the union in the private sector might change in the future. I suppose that we're at the start of a legislative programme that's quite lengthy, but as we look at the statistics as they stand, only 12%-ish of private sector employees are represented by a trade union in a collective bargaining arrangement, and that's so the companies that we're talking about are very much in a minority at the moment, and many of our supply base are not covered by a trade union or in a trade union collective agreement. So those things are of interest to us for the future, I think.
Okay. Johnson, would you add anything to that? Or do you think pay bargaining is going to change in your business in the future as a result of the bill?
I don't think it will. I mean, I think there are a couple of areas of concern that we've got around the bill. I mean, one of them relates to a point that came up earlier about industrial action ballot notice periods. Mm-hmm. So, not that we've had an industrial action ballot in some time, I'm pleased to say, but any reduction in that notice period, I think, is something that we would be concerned about for a couple of reasons. I think the first is that it's important that businesses are able to do at least some basic contingency planning if there is going to be strike action. And they need to be able to inform their customers so that they understand what the likely impact of that action would be. But the second reason is probably more fundamental, because if we're going to make industrial action the last resort, as I think it should be, given how damaging industrial action is to the industrial relations within the company, potentially financially to the company, reputationally with its customers. It tends to have a very long tail and painful impact. So it should be a last resort. We want to promote dialogue as the route to resolving disputes wherever we can. So actually having that extended period between the ballot and the commencement of industrial action is a final opportunity for conciliation or mediation. And we did touch on it a little bit earlier with Ben Willmott's session. I think there is an important role here for ACAS to play. I think enabling more employers to work with ACAS to resolve disputes and to build the skills and capability that I think we described as atrophying across the economy. I think it's right that we need more people who are better skilled at finding ways through disputes and getting out of the sort of cycle of demand and threat that has too often been the adversarial approach to industrial relations in this country. And then there's one other thing in relation to the industrial action ballots process that I think would be helpful, which is the introduction of perhaps a statutory code of practice that says no industrial action can take place until either an internal dispute procedure has been exhausted, giving every opportunity for there to be proper dialogue and encouraging actually employers and trade unions to agree those sorts of internal dispute procedures between them. But if that's not in place, to at least ensure that ACAS conciliation or mediation opportunities have been exhausted before strike action can commence.
Very useful. Antonio Pence, yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. Beverley, I hadn't heard that criticism of the employment bill before. I would very much, as a trade unionist, like to see a higher rate of unionisation in the private sector. Many of your supply chain businesses are in my constituency in the West Midlands, and I go and see them, and the vast majority are not unionised. I would love them to be unionised. What would that strategic plan for trade unionism in the private sector? Can you tell me a bit more about it? I wasn't expecting to hear that from you today, and I'd love to hear a little more.
My thinking on it is that one of the many reasons why people can be resistant to an initial trade union approach is that there isn't a duty or an obligation within the trade union within the UK for the future employees of the business and for the future longevity of the business. Okay. So when I do speak to supply chain who are either just recently recognised or are in the process of recognising or haven't recognised, and that is one of the fears that, as Dominic just said, that there will be an adversarial approach of a demand for a short-term demand for increasing wages for people currently in the business without taking into account what that means in the long term. Now, in my experience, great trade union leaders are thinking about the future and they are thinking about the long-term legacy of the business, but it's not a duty on them to do that within the terms of reference. And some additional work in that space. You've talked in the bill about trade union learning and trade union how we teach and learn about trade union and collectivism, because that is also an issue when we speak to new employees about our trade union. And Dominic said that it's over about BA systems, but we won't have to introduce new things to explain the union to our people. But when we try, we discover that it's something that, especially in the private sector, people are they don't know about it, they have not heard, and they don't understand what the real meaning of collective work is. So there's a lot of work to do to unpick many years of not doing that education and not making sure that people understand what's expected. And perhaps, in my thinking, a way of doing that might be to have some level of right or obligation within the trade union terms of reference that allows them to express that future and that future legacy. At the moment, it's quite difficult for them to do that because it's not in the terms of reference.
Okay, thank you. Alison Griffiths.
Thank you. Both businesses work with a range of smaller businesses in your supply chains, as you've already said, which have been described by some business representatives as more exposed to the costs of employment reform. Should more be done to help smaller firms manage the costs of change? Who wants to go first?
I would say yes, and I would probably draw on what Ben Willmott said earlier, that actually I think small business people do struggle with the level of understanding and compliance with employment law. And the bill introduces a significant range of new requirements. I think small businesses will benefit from support with that, and Ben talked about, increasing the resources available to ACAS. That would certainly strike me as a sensible way forward.
Answers my second part of my question. So, and from a JLR perspective, what would your view be?
Specifically with regard to ACAS?
So number one, should more be done to help smaller firms manage the cost of change? And the second part of the question, which I didn't need to ask because you answered it for me, was that the CIPD has called for renewed investment to support the work of bodies such as ACAS and enhance social partnership between businesses and unions. Would this be helpful?
I think it would certainly be helpful if smaller businesses had access to better advice and better support during the change. The cost of that change, it would depend on the legislation that was being brought forward, but if it was to be expensive, I mean, in some cases we've received legislative change and it's an unintended consequence of things like systems change, which for a business like JLR we can put into our programme. There will be consequences for putting it in, but we can usually manage that cost increase. For some smaller businesses, even making some basic payroll changes is quite a major change for them with their the difficulties that they have. So either more time to allow people to plan for that cost or assistance with the cost, but perhaps an easier way is plenty of advice and plenty of support and easy access to advice that they don't have to pay for, and not firms of lawyers wanting to charge them a lot of money for advice that they could get more easily from somewhere else.
Do you think your supply chain is at risk, or a proportion of your supply chain is at risk from any of the changes coming through?
I think there's a more general, the automotive industry is actually quite a fragile ecosystem. We've had two very unfortunate announcements recently with Luton and Ford, one plant closure and one redundancy programme, and the supply chain are not immune to that. We have to step in quite regularly in order to shore up suppliers that we just cannot do without, who are really struggling themselves. So I think it just points to an overall fragility in the system, and of course any additional cost in a fragile system is going to cause more disruption in there. So, enabling those businesses to make the change and increase the sort of the high watermark of employee rights and things like that, but in a way that they can do without fundamentally adding to the cost line of their business is what we need.
So we were interested in this because we were interested in whether you think you will get drawn into helping smaller businesses in your supply chain adapt to the Employment Rights Bill, given your own pretty happy records of industrial relations. Do you think that's likely to happen?
It will add to the labour costs of some of those much smaller businesses, and some of those much smaller businesses are on a knife edge with their profitability. So at each point there is a straw that breaks the camel's back.
Do you think that you'll then get drawn into helping your supply chain businesses manage this transition?
That happens all the time, weekly, monthly.
Interesting. Mike, do you think that's...
It has been the case that we have had to intervene to support in our supply chain from time to time, including on industrial relations matters, and it sort of comes back to the point that Ben Willmott was making
just the normal
about capability. Well, I think it is to some extent inevitable, because the resilience of our supply chain is critical to us. So if there is a problem in our supply chain, eventually we do tend to get involved in trying to resolve it. That is a cost of business for us, but I think it's also reflective of the lack of capability within management teams, within HR teams, to deal with industrial relations. And if we are going to see an expansion of trade union recognition, we are obviously going to see an expansion of employment rights. I think that does mean that there needs to be more investment in HR, in particular capability in this space.
One question, Tom Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Dominic, BAE Systems, Scotland and the Clyde, you are putting together your applied shipbuilding academy, which is part of a really enormous investment in training skills for young people. I believe you might top £1 billion since the start of the decade, with something like £230 million earmarked for next year. Is there anything that the government can do to help to maximise that investment and amplify the impact of that?
So you're absolutely right. I mean, we've just opened a fabulous skills academy, in our naval ships business, and we'll be training large numbers of apprentices through that programme. And we've just made an enormous investment in the new build hall to make Type 26s alongside each other inside on the Clyde, which is something that our workforce will massively benefit from and which will improve productivity as well. The apprentice levy is something that we draw on heavily, and it's key to our investment in those apprenticeship programmes. So whilst we understand the appetite for greater flexibility in the way that levy funds are spent, we do think it's critical that there is adequate aggregate funding for apprenticeship programmes so that companies like ours, and no doubt JLR, can continue to invest heavily in early careers programmes. So that would be a big focus for us.
Okay, thank you. So the employment rights bill in and of itself won't necessarily negatively impact your ability to invest in upskilling?
No, but if there were a significant change to the way the apprenticeship levy works, and there was not enough money allocated directly to apprenticeships purely, then I think that would be a cause for concern, given that we are investing so much as a company in early careers and apprenticeship programmes.
Murray, Beverley, any observations on that?
Well, we invest significantly in apprentice programmes. I think it was 300 or so last year, and 1,300 in total are in training right now in the training academies. I would say that the apprentice levy and more flexibility in the apprentice levy is more important, again, for the smaller companies, because we do need a team of people to access the levy who work on making sure that we're compliant to access the levy, and that's what's required. In a smaller business, that's not possible. So people are missing out on levy money that they should be able to invest in skills, and that's important for the sector. And as the supply chain gets smaller, as car plants are reduced in this country, that becomes even more important. So I can't see anything in this bill specifically that prevents that, but an additional investment in skills and looking at high quality skills that will give high quality and high value jobs will always be vital to the industrial strategy for the country, so it must be welcomed.
I sort of, if I can just add, I agree on we need to absolutely protect the early careers stuff, but as a business we end up handing far too much money back, and at the point of a technology transition, we have a duty of care to our existing workforce that need to be reskilled. So needing to take that existing workforce that have some degree of qualification already, but is now diminishing in relevance, and being able to use unspent money not at the expense of early careers who are already accommodated, and being able to reuse some of that money on our existing workforce is something we're really keen to see, because the skills of tomorrow are not the skills of today are not going to be the skills of tomorrow for our business.
Well, look, that's been an extremely useful session for us. Thank you so much for taking time out to come and give us evidence. That will all go into the evidence that we're about to take over the days and weeks to come before we report back to Parliament, I hope before the report stage of the bill. But for now, thank you very much indeed. The committee is very grateful to you for your time and your evidence today. That concludes this panel, and that concludes this session. Order, order.